Good afternoon, distinguished guests, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, the Ministry of Industry and Trade of Vietnam, the Embassy of Canada to Vietnam, and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, it is my great honor to welcome you to Canada-Viet Nam Forum on Economic Resilience and CPTPP, EU Linkages. Today, Forum brings together policymakers, business leaders, academic, and trade experts from Canada, Vietnam, the Indo-Pacific, and Europe to explore how stronger economic cooperation can contribute to more resilient supply chain, chartered digital trade, and the rules-based international trading system among CPTPP and European Union member economies. Throughout this afternoon, we will hear from distinguished government officials, leading policy experts, and private sector representatives who will share their perspective on strengthening economic resilience and unlocking new opportunities for collaboration. Thank you all for taking your time to join us today. We are honored by your presence and look forward to the engagement afternoon of meaningful dialogue. To officially begin today's forum, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Barrett Bingley, Asia Regional Director of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Mr. Bingley leads APF Canada Indo-Pacific initiative focusing on trade diversification, economic security, digital trade, artificial intelligence, critical mineral, and resilient supply chains. Prior to joining APF Canada, he spent more than 13 years with the Economist Group, where he built strategic partnerships across the Asia-Pacific region. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Barrett Bingley.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the forum. We have a full house. Bonjour à tous. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour le forum Canada-Vietnam sur la résilience économique et les liens entre le CPTPP et l'Union européenne. So let me jump right into why are we here today? Why are we having this forum on the eve of the CPTPP senior officials meeting? Because the global trading order is under unprecedented strain. US withdrawal from multilateral trade disciplines, the weaponization of economic tools as instruments of statecraft, and accelerating supply chain fragmentation, not least due to a number of ongoing wars, are forcing like-minded countries and economies to build new anchors for rules-based commerce. In this environment, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP, which I will not mind if all of the panelists refer to just as TPP to save yourselves during the discussion, and the European Union's trade architecture represent two of the most robust, high-standard trading frameworks in the world. Together, the TPP and EU member economies account for approximately 32% of global GDP and 37% of global trade. The case for bringing them closer together is strategically urgent and practically tractable. As Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said in February 2026, it's the opportunity to have a rules-based trading bloc of over 1 billion people with complementary economies, and also provides a basis potentially for further expansion out of that. So with that spur in mind from our Canadian Prime Minister, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to all of our distinguished speakers, moderators, partners, and guests for joining us First, I'd like to acknowledge our core organizers, the Ministry of Industry and Trade of the Socialist Republic of Vietnam and the Embassy of Canada to Vietnam for their close partnership in bringing this forum together. In particular, I would like to thank Mr. No Chung Khan, Deputy Director General, Multilateral Trade Policy Department at MOIT, and he is Vietnamese senior CPTPP official, and also thank Ms. Nguyen Son Tra, Director, WTO and Trade Negotiations Division, also with MOIT. I'd like to recognize His Excellency, Canadian Ambassador Jim Nicol, who will speak after me, as well as Ms. Mary Catherine Spears, our senior official on CPTPP negotiations and the Director General of Global Affairs Canada. And I should also recognize Ms. Alexandra Smith, the British Consul General in Ho Chi Minh City and Trade Director for Vietnam, as well as our own Annie Dubé, our Consul General for Canada here in Ho Chi Minh City. Thank you for being here today. And an unexpected surprise, we have joining with us our Canadian Conservative Member of Parliament, Mr. Chak Ao, in his newly appointed role as the chair of the Conservative Pacific Gateway Economic Engagement Caucus. Welcome, Chak. Their leadership continues to shape each country's engagement in the TPP and the broader regional trading system. Special mention as well to Ms. Phong Nguyen and her team from MOIT for helping bring this together over months of work. And I would also like to recognize our Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, headed by Lawrence Newman and Zach Herbers and their team, Lynn, AP, and Tuan, for the excellent on-ground support. We've also helped fill the room today with assistance from the British Chamber of Commerce, the Australian Chamber of Commerce, and the Singapore Chamber of Commerce for Vietnam. Many of you will have heard from and registered with our own team, Nadira and Jafar. They've all helped bring together such a diverse community of policymakers, business leaders, and trade experts. Throughout the afternoon, we'll be privileged to hear from an exceptional group of speakers, which speaks to what Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada does. We bring together government, academia, diplomacy, the legal sector, the private sector. And today we're joined by trade officials from countries as diverse as not only Canada and Vietnam, but also Japan, Singapore, the European Union, and others. They will offer their perspectives and valuable insights on the strategic direction of regional economic cooperation and, importantly, the practical realities of implementing high-standard trade agreements. We are equally fortunate to have leading voices from internationally respected think tanks and universities, which you can see in your program. This includes the Jacques Delors Institute, the Heinrich Foundation, Vietnam's Foreign Trade University, and ourselves, represented by Mr. Dan Chiriak. Our discussions will be enriched by the perspectives of the business community, including the Business Council of Canada, the Fasken Law Firm, the Eurocham, and leading trade policy practitioners who work directly with companies navigating today's increasingly complex trading environment. Finally, I'd like to thank my fellow moderators, Mr. Lawrence Newman and Zach Herbers, who will help guide today's discussions. Together, I hope you can see that we've brought a precise mix of expertise all into this room, those who negotiate the rules, those who analyze them, and those who are tasked to act upon them. I'm confident today's discussions will deepen our understanding of the challenges ahead and generate practical ideas that hopefully we can implement by this November and report back to our political leaders. We look forward to the upcoming discussions. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Bingley, for setting the stage for today's important discussion. And now, it's my great honor to invite His Excellency Jim Nicol, Ambassador of Canada to Vietnam. Ambassador Nicol brings more than 3 decades of diplomatic experience across the Indo-Pacific, having served in senior leadership positions throughout Asia and North America, helping advance Canada's international partnership and international engagement. Please join me in warmly welcome His Excellency Jim Nicol.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, business leaders, and friends, good afternoon. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to this Canada-Viet Nam Forum on Economic Resilience and CPTPP EU Linkages. I would like to thank our partners, the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, the Ministry of Industry and Trade for Vietnam, and the Canadian Chambers of Commerce in Vietnam for bringing together such an impressive group of policymakers, business leaders, and experts at a particularly important moment for the global economy. The theme for today's forum could not be more timely. Around the world, businesses are navigating an increasingly uncertain international environment. Geopolitical tensions, supply chain disruptions, economic security concerns, and rising protectionism are reshaping the international trading environment. In this context, the value of trusted partnerships and rules-based trade has never been clearer. For Canada, this is not simply a matter of economic policy. As a trading nation, our prosperity depends on open markets, clear rules, and reliable partners. Canada has long championed a rules-based international trading system because it creates opportunities for businesses, strengthens resilience, and supports growth for countries of all sizes. This is one reason why Canada's relationship with Vietnam has become increasingly important. The Canada-Vietnam economic relationship has expanded over the past decade. Bilateral merchandise trade exceeded 20 billion Canadian dollars in 2025, making Vietnam one of Canada's most important trading partners in Southeast Asia. Canadian investment in Vietnam continues to grow, reflecting confidence in Vietnam's long-term economic prospects and its role as a key Indo-Pacific partner. I was pleased to meet recently with Prime Minister Lê Minh Hồng. Our discussion reinforced the strong alignment between Canada and Vietnam on many of the challenges and opportunities facing the Indo-Pacific today. We spoke about expanding trade and investment, strengthening resilient supply chains, advancing clean growth, and ensuring that our economies remain competitive in a rapidly changing world. These conversations are directly relevant to today's discussion. This year is particularly significant because Vietnam serves as chair of the CPTPP Commission. Vietnam's leadership comes at a time when the CPTPP is demonstrating its strategic importance not only as a trade agreement, but as a framework for building a more connected, resilient, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. Canada is proud to be one of the original members of the CPTPP and remains deeply committed to its success. The agreement brings together economies from across the Pacific that share a commitment to high standard trade rules, transparency, and open markets. At a time when many countries are questioning the benefits of globalization, the CPTPP demonstrates that open and inclusive trade can still be a powerful driver of economic growth and resilience. Since the CPTPP entered into force between Canada and Vietnam in 2019, our bilateral trade relationship has expanded significantly. But the greatest opportunities may still lie ahead. The next phase of CPTPP is about more than tariff reductions. It is about expansion, strengthening supply chains, supporting digital trade, facilitating investment, and helping businesses diversify into trusted markets across the Indo-Pacific. We are also looking beyond the CPTPP itself. One of the most important developments in global trade today is the growing dialogue between CPTPP economies and the European Union. As economies seek to reduce fragmentation and improve interoperability between different trade frameworks, there is increasing interest in regulatory cooperation, digital governance, sustainable trade, and investment facilitation. Canada deeply appreciates the opportunity that we have had to work alongside Vietnam during its chairmanship year to advance the CPTPP's engagement with the European Union. With coastlines that touch both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, Canada's geography gives us a natural advantage to deepening engagement with Europe and the Indo-Pacific at the same time. Meanwhile, we believe that Vietnam's comprehensive and growing network of trade agreements spanning both the Asia-Pacific and European markets has put Vietnam in a good position as CPTPP chair to help carry the torch for greater cooperation between like-minded trading blocs. This is also very much aligned with Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy, which recognizes that Canada's future prosperity is increasingly linked to the economic dynamism of this region. Vietnam is a key partner in that vision, and Canada is committed to deepening our collaboration in trade, investment, innovation, clean growth, and economic security. I hope today's discussions will be practical, forward-looking, and focused on identifying opportunities that deliver real benefits for businesses and citizens alike. Thank you for being here today. I wish you a productive and successful forum, and I look forward to the discussions ahead. Merci beaucoup. Xin cảm ơn.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your inspiring remark. Our next speaker plays a leading role in shaping Vietnam's international trade agenda. Please welcome Mr. Ngo Trung Khanh, Deputy Director General of the Multilateral Trade Policy Department, Ministry of Industry and Trade of Vietnam, and Vietnam Senior Official for the CPTPP. Mr. Khanh has been instrumental in negotiating and implementing many of Vietnam's landmark trade agreements, including the CPTPP, EVFTA, UKVFTA, RCEP, and IPEF. Please welcome Mr. Ngo Trung Khanh.
Distinguished guests, business leaders, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to join Ambassador Jim Nicol and Mr. Barrett Bingley in welcoming all of you to the Canada-Viet Nam Forum on Economic Resilience and CPTPP Linkages. On behalf of Ministry of Industry and Trade, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to Embassy of Canada and Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada and Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam and all partners who have worked closely with us to make this forum possible. I am particularly pleased to see such a strong, diverse gathering today, senior officials from CPTPP countries, representatives of European Union, business leaders, legal practitioners, academies, and trade policy experts. This diversity is important because the issues before us today are no longer issues that governments can address alone. Economic resilience, supply chain security, digital transformation, and sustainable growth all require a much closer partnership between policymakers and business community. I think we are meeting at a time of profound change in global economy. For many decades, business operated on the assumption that markets would continue to open, supply chains would become increasingly resilient, efficient, and global trading system would provide a reliable, stable environment for long-term investment. But today, many of those assumptions are being tested. Businesses are facing geopolitical uncertainty, rising trade restriction, more frequent supply chain disruption, rapid technological change, and increasingly complex regulatory requirements across different markets. At the same time, governments are paying greater attention to economic security, strategic industry, critical infrastructure, data governance, and the resilience of essential supply chains. These concerns are understandable. However, we must also recognize a very important risk. If economic security is pursued mainly through new barriers, fragmented regulations, and inward-looking policies, the result may not be greater resilience. It may instead lead to higher cost, reduced investment, weaker innovation, and greater uncertainty for businesses. For Vietnam, economic resilience does not mean economic isolation. It means diversification. It means building trusted and reliable partnership. It means strengthening the capacity of enterprises to adapt to disruption. And it means maintaining an open, transparent, and rules-based environment in which businesses can make long-term decisions with confidence. This is precisely when the CPTPP has an important role to play. The CPTPP is more than a tariff reduction agreement. It is a framework for economic integration across trade in goods, services, investment, digital trade, government procurement, IP, labor, environment, and regulatory cooperation. Its value lies not only in opening markets, but also in providing businesses with predictability. So when companies invest in new factories, develop new regional supply chain, establish digital platforms, or enter a new services market, they need to know that rules will remain transparent, commitment will be respected, and commercial relationship will not be disrupted without due consideration. As CPTPP chair in 2026, Vietnam therefore sees its responsibility as going beyond the organization of meetings, of administration of existing agreement. Our responsibility is to ensure that CPTPP remains relevant to the realities facing businesses today. This means maintaining high standards and credibility of the agreement, but it also means asking a very practical question. How can the CPTPP create more real opportunities for businesses, especially small and medium enterprises? For government, we all know that we usually talk about charters, legal instruments. For businesses, the questions are more direct. Can I access the market? Can I sort inputs efficiently? Can I invest with confidence? And can I comply with rules without facing unnecessary costs? And can I find reliable partners in other CPT economies? The true measure of CPT success is therefore not simply the number of commitments contained in the agreement, it's the number of enterprises that can understand those commitments and then convert them into investment and trade opportunities. Canada and Vietnam provide a strong foundation for doing exactly that. Our two economies are highly complementary. Canada has considerable strengths in areas such as clean technology, agriculture, agri-food, financial services, education, digital solution, critical minerals, and advanced manufacturing. In the meantime, Vietnam offers a dynamic market, a competitive manufacturing base, a growing digital economy, an increasingly skilled workforce, and extensive connectivity through its network of free trade agreements. Since the CPTPP entered into force, trade between our two countries has expanded. Yet the investment, services, and technology cooperation remains well below its potential. This should not be seen as a weakness. It should be seen as an opportunity. There is a very significant room for Canadian enterprises to participate more deeply in Vietnam's development and for Vietnamese enterprises to become more closely connected to Canadian and North American markets. There is also scope for companies from both countries to build joint supply chains, serving the wider CPTPP region and European markets. This brings us to the wider theme of today's forum, the relationship between CPTPP and the European Union. The purpose of closer CPTPP and EU engagement should not be to create another layer of institution or another abstract policy process. It should be to make our two economic spaces work better together. Businesses increasingly operate across regions rather than within a single trade bloc. For example, a product may be designed in Canada, use components from Japan or Vietnam, incorporate European technology, and be sold to consumers across several continents. However, businesses often face different requirements relating to standards, data, sustainability, rules of origin, product certification, and investment regulation. When appropriate, greater regulatory compatibility, mutual recognition, and interoperability could significantly reduce these costs. As chair of CPT in 2026, Vietnam will seek to promote a practical and inclusive agenda. We want the CPTPP to remain open and forward-looking. We want it to respond more efficiently to emerging challenges, and we want the business community to be more closely involved in shaping the next stage of cooperation. Governments can negotiate agreements and create frameworks, but businesses are the ones that turn those frameworks into factories, into products, and into technology. The next chapter of the CPTPP should therefore not be written not only at the negotiating table. It should be written in factories, in ports, innovation centers, universities, startups, and digital platforms where business can create real values. I hope today's forum will help us write the next chapter. I encourage all participants to speak openly, share practical experience, and identify areas where governments can remove obstacles and where businesses can build new partnerships. The success of this forum will not ultimately be measured by the number of speeches delivered today. It will be measured by the ideas that are taken forward, the partnership that is established, and the new trade and investment opportunity that emerge from our discussion. With that, I wish you a productive, candid, and a forward-looking forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khanh, for sharing Vietnam's vision and commitment towards strengthening regional economic cooperation. We now move to our opening keynote. The geo-economic of trade architecture. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Mary Carotine Spears, Director General of the Trade Negotiation Bureaus of Global Affairs Canada and Canada's Senior Official for the CPTPP. Ms. Spears leads Canada multilateral and regional trade and negotiation and brings intense expertise in shaping Canada engagement into the evolving global trading system. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Mary Carotine Spears.
Thank you. Good afternoon, bon après-midi. CPTPP counterparts, business leaders, academics, experts. I'm Canada's senior official for the CPTPP, and it's my pleasure to join you here today in Ho Chi Minh City for this timely discussion on economic resilience and international trade. I'd like to join other speakers in thanking the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, as well as the Ministry of Industry and Trade of Vietnam, and the Embassy of Canada in Hanoi, as well as the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam for their partnership in organizing today's event. We're meeting at the halfway point in Vietnam's year as chair of the CPTPP Commission, at a moment of fragility in the global trading system and when economies around the world are reassessing how trade, technology, and resilience intersect. At the start of this year, in Davos, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney was very direct about his assessment of the state of the world. He described the current state of the international order not as a transition, but as a rupture. His message was clear: nostalgia is not a strategy. We cannot wait for the rules-based system to return to what it once was. That may never happen. That is why, as part of today's discussion, we'll be looking at how the CPTPP parties and the EU, as middle powers and like-minded blocs, need to work together to proactively shape the system and the future that we want for ourselves. The CPTPP EU Trade and Investment Dialogue is a platform to drive deeper intra-regional trade and investment links. It's not about looking at the CPTPP and the EU as separate entities. It's about recognizing that we are two parts of one solution in an increasingly fragmented world. To quote the Prime Minister, if middle powers aren't at the table, they're on the menu. And for Canada, CPTPP EU engagement is about making sure that together we are the ones setting that table. When we think about trade agreements, we often think about tariff schedules or market access commitments. But today's trade architecture serves a much broader purpose, and it creates pathways for goods, services, investment, data, and innovation, offering predictability and consistency for business. In that respect, agreements such as the CPTPP represent far more than just trade liberalization. The CPTPP's framework allows diverse economies to manage differences while maintaining confidence in common, high-standard rules. The agreement reflects a vision of economic integration that is both ambitious and adaptable. It connects economies across the globe through high-standard rules on trade, investment, services, digital commerce, intellectual property, regulatory transparency, and more importantly, it demonstrates that openness and resilience are not opposing goals. In fact, resilient economies are often those with the broadest networks of trusted partners. Diversification is resilience. Connectivity is resilience, and rules-based cooperation is resilience. More broadly, the CPTPP's growing appeal is an indication that for many economies, they continue to see the strong value in high-quality, rules-based trade integration. At a time when fragmentation is growing, this is an encouraging signal. Developing partnerships like the CPTPP EU Trade and Investment Dialogue, as well as the concurrent dialogue between CPTPP and ASEAN member states, can function as strategic infrastructure, establishing and growing trust and predictability while reducing uncertainty. In a period of geopolitical volatility, these functions become ever more valuable. That brings us to today's theme, the relationship between the CPTPP and the European Union. At first glance, CPTPP parties and the European Union may seem like distinct geographic and economic spaces, but in reality, we have become increasingly interconnected through supply chains, investment flows, technology partnerships, shared economic interests, and now dialogue. We face common challenges and remain committed to supporting a rules-based multilateral trading system. Together, the CPTPP and EU represent not only significant market size and economic power, but a shared commitment. CPTPP-EU cooperation can send a powerful signal that convergence remains a strategic choice and strengthens our collective resilience. We're prioritizing the value of predictability, balancing openness and security through trusted partnerships, and pursuing novel policy solutions. The question is not whether there should be greater engagement between CPTPP members and the EU. The question is, how can we structure that engagement most effectively? When Canada talks about trying to build a bridge between the CPTPP and EU, we aren't just talking about leveraging existing trade routes. We're also talking about creating a zone of stability and a third path so that smaller, open economies do not need to choose between competing hegemons. We are creating a zone of comfort where a strong shared commitment between the CPTPP and the EU towards long-term economic cooperation and collective growth will embolden our businesses to take on the challenge of internationalization. Our discussions are building on outcomes of the inaugural CPTPP-EU Dialogue, Trade and Investment Dialogue, which was hosted by Australia in November 2025. The dialogue was a milestone moment where the CPTPP and EU trade ministers outlined collaborative priorities and provided a mandate to work together on digital trade, supply chain resilience, and the global trade environment. With that said, we understand that visions and best intentions don't move containers and don't actually drive trade. outcomes do. Officials across the CPTPP and the EU are working closely to deliver meaningful near-term and longer-term outcomes. Our aim now is to drive forward our work with ambition, recognizing that we need to bring results to bear to show that this path for cooperation is positive, productive, and sustainable. In this regard, Canada has been pleased to have the opportunity to serve as a co-chair and facilitator for official engagement between the CPTPP parties and the EU, supporting Vietnam as CPTPP chair for 2026. We welcome the leadership of several CPTPP members, including Japan, Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore, to develop proposals, convene experts, and advance an agenda on digital trade and supply chain resilience. We also know that governments don't build supply chains, companies do. Today's forum provides the perfect opportunity to share unique perspectives between academics, industry experts, and policymakers, and to discuss innovative ideas. It is in these spaces that business leaders have a key role. Your daily realities and practical experiences on the front lines of global commerce are critical input into our policy-making process. Together with evidence-based perspectives and the specialized knowledge that we can draw from, including from some of our academics and industry experts, this can allow us to propose and develop a variety of solutions. As policymakers, we are here to listen to these ideas to help shape our thinking in terms of what we seek to execute. I think I can speak for officials across the CPTPP parties and the EU to say that we are looking forward to deepening our understanding of the priorities of businesses and the academic community from our exchanges today, and that this can help to build a more complete picture of the opportunities that can be driven through CPTPP EU linkages. From identifying opportunities for alignment to discussing supply chain resilience and digital trade, I trust that today's panelists will provide us with invaluable insight from various perspectives. To conclude, the future of the rules-based trading order will not be secured by nostalgia for past approaches, and nor will it be secured by any single agreement. It will be secured by building stronger linkages between the world's high-standard economic frameworks, both in support of multilateral rules and in developing new trade architecture. That is why building a bridge between the CPTPP and EU matters, not only for prosperity and resilience, but for the preservation and renewal of an open international economic order. Canada remains committed to supporting the CPTPP priorities, including furthering CPTPP and EU engagement. From Canada's perspective, this is ultimately what geoeconomics is about. In a world increasingly defined by strategic uncertainty, the answer is not less integration, it is smarter integration, building networks of trust, reducing fragmentation, and diversifying our partnerships. And CPTPP EU convergence can become one of the important building blocks for the next generation of global trade architecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beers. Our next address will provide insight into Vietnam priority during its 2026 CPTPP chairmanship. Please welcome Ms. Nguyễn Sơn Trà, Director of the WTO and Trade Negotiation Division of the Ministry of Industry and Trade of Vietnam, and Vietnam Deputy Senior Official for the CPTPP. With nearly 20 years of experience in international trading negotiation, she has played a key role in negotiating and implementing many of Vietnam's major free trade agreements. Please welcome.
Distinguished guests, CPTPP colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, It is my pleasure to be here today at the Canada Viet Nam Forum on Economic Resilience and CPTPP EU Linkages. I would like to thank the Asia Pacific Foundation and the Embassy of Canada to Vietnam and all our partners to bring us today. Before I talk about Vietnam's priority as the chair of CPTPP in 2026, let me start with one simple observation. The issue we are discussing today are also those that CPTPP members are working on this year: economic resilience, digital trade, stronger supply chains, closer cooperation with external partners, including the European Union, and above all, in making better use of the CPTPP. That's why today's forum is very timely. Our chairmanship this year is built around the theme, share visions, share actions. The message is very simple. We already share many goals, many objectives, and our job now is to turn those goals and objectives into practical actions and real results. As we know, the global trading environment is changing very quickly, and supply chains are also is changing. Digital technologies are reshaping trade, and sustainability requirements are becoming very more important. Against this background, the CPTPP members have already agreed to focus on 5 priorities. The first one is to keep the agreement modern and relevant. Through the general review and update negotiation, members are looking at how CPTPP agreement can respond to new developments, including digital trade, resilient supply chains, and also other emerging issues relating to trade. And the second priority is expansion. Interest from many aspiring economies show the continuing value of the CPTPP for the time being. And at the same time, expansion must preserve the agreement's high standards and credibility. And the third priority is to strengthen cooperation with external partners. And this is where our today forums is very relevant. Last year in Melbourne, CPTPP minister already agreed to deepen cooperation between the CPTPP and the EU. And this year, our task is to turn that commitment into practical work. We are focusing on the 3 pillars. The first one is about the digital trade. The second one is about the supply chain resilience. And the third one is the global trade environment. The goal, and today Vietnam and Canada are very well placed to contribute to this work. The discussion this afternoon is closely aligned with our chairmanship priority. So the first one, a panel is to explore where CPTPP and EU cooperation can bring practical benefits. The second panel will discuss on supply chain, digital trade, and economic resilience. So these discussions are directly relevant to the ongoing work of the CPTPP on strengthening the agreement and responding to the new trade developments. And the third panel will focus on how businesses can make better use of the CPTPP agreement. A trade agreement creates opportunities, but businesses also need information, need partners, finance, logistics, and predictable procedures. So that is how opportunity become real business. So for this reason, we greatly value the participation and contribution of businesses, researchers, legal experts, and policy specialists. Your practical experience and knowledge will help governments make better choices. And the fourth priority is to strengthen the institutional foundation of the CPTPP. As the agreement expands and its agenda broadens, effective institutional arrangement is becoming increasingly important. Vietnam supports stronger coordination among CPTPP party bodies and continue work on the future CPTPP support unit so that the agreement can be implemented more effectively over a long term. And the fifth priority is about improvement of implementation and utilization. Our objective is not simple to increase the use of tariff preferences. We also want businesses to make greater use of the agreement in other sectors, including services, investment, digital trade, and regional supply chains. And this requires a closer cooperation between governments and the private sector. And during the first half of this year, a member has already made a lot of good progress through 2 senior officer summit meetings in March and May, and also the virtual ministerial meeting and the 10th Commission meeting just held last month. We reached important outcomes on expansion, implementation, cooperation, and we also agreed to establish an ad hoc working group. So this achievement provides a strong foundation for the rest of the year with the aim of achieving a further substantive outcome. So today's forum is another important step. It allows governments, businesses, and experts to exchange practical ideas that can support the future work of the CPTPP agreement. So let me finish with one simple message. Vietnam wants to ensure that the CPTPP remain modern, open, and effective. And we want an agreement that continue to expand responsibly, strengthen cooperation with external partners, and delivers real benefits for all businesses and our people. And we look forward to working with all CPTPP members and partners to achieve these goals together. And thank you very much, and wish you to have a very productive and successful forum today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nguyễn Sơn Trà. And now we begin our first panel discussion in Thai. Building the block, the strategic case for CPTPP, EU alignment. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and panelists. Returning as moderator is Mr. Barrett Bingley. Dr. Elvira Fabry, Director of Trade and Economic Security at Institut Jacques Delors and co-founder of the EU CPTPP Dialogue. Churiak, Distinguished Fellow at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada and former Deputy Chief Economist at Global Affairs Canada. Mr. Raphael de Bustamante, Deputy Head of Mission, European Union Delegation to Vietnam. Sarah Defer, AI, EU's Delegation to Vietnam. Association Professional Đào Ngọc Tiến, Vice President of Foreign Trade University and leading expert on international trade and economic interaction. Together, we will explore opportunities for deeper collaboration between the CPTPP and the European Union in strengthening economic resilience and reinforcing the rules-based trading system.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. Well, here we are to kick off panel one. Thank you very much to all of our opening keynote speakers. You really set the stage for everyone. It's excellent, especially to hear the detail about Vietnam's plans for the rest of the CPTPP chairing year. I think it really sets the stage well leading into this panel, which is about bridging the blocks, the strategic case for CPTPP EU alignment. We'll have two more panels following this, following the coffee break, that really bring in the private sector and drill down. But this panel is meant to kind of take a look at where have we come from in the last kind of year or so as the idea of CPTPP and EU has been brought into not only the official sphere, but also the Track 2 sphere with a number of think tanks engaging in this, and we'll hear about some of what's been happening there. Let me just quickly set the scene. You've heard about originally the 5 priority areas of work of the 2 blocks, which has been condensed down to 3, which are on Madame Sontra's slides. The first being trade diversification, facilitation, and supply chain resilience. The second, an area of work around digital trade. And the third, supporting the global trade environment, which is usually taken as essentially supporting the WTO. So this session, we're meant to make the intellectual case for the next steps. Why is deeper alignment between the 2 blocks, trade architectures, potentially on areas including digital governance, rules of origin, sustainable trade, maybe investment screening? Why does this serve the interests of the middle power economies who are navigating this fragmenting world we hear about in almost every keynote speech? We're going to try and assess some realistic pathways from the current dialogue process towards concepts including mutual recognition, regulatory coherence commitments, and interoperability frameworks. So each of our speakers will give an opening statement around the key questions of this strategic case for alignment and what are the most achievable and high-value areas of regulatory convergence in the near term. To translate that into business speak, by the end of your financial year, what's going to change for you, and what do you need to look at and consider for your 3-year planning, and to tell your board? So, we have 4 very different perspectives on this question. But first, Dr. Fabry, I'd like to turn to you. Tell us what JDI has been doing in this space, and where do you see this process going? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And it's very important for me precisely to feel the pulse of what is happening in the CPTPP community, and notably with a lot of business representatives here, because you are the actors of globalization, and the voice of business today is more than ever needed to support the sustainability of global trade. Why am I here? The Jacques Delors Institute, based in Paris, has launched a year ago, exactly at this period, an initiative which was a track 1.5, bringing officials, experts, and businesses, increasingly businesses, to discuss precisely what could be done in terms of cooperation, coordination between the EU and CPTPP. At that moment, we didn't have yet the official track. The official track was announced quite discreetly during the fall, and it happened in Melbourne in November, and our initial conference in Paris took place in December. Since then, we had another one in Tokyo in May, and we will have another one, the next one in the UK during the fall. Why is that so? First of all, I mean, the justification has been extensively presented just now by our official representative. What is at stake with the deterioration of the global environment? What is the risk that we're facing? The system is indeed under extreme pressure, and Prime Minister Carney is very right to talk about a rupture. It's not only a sort of soft transition. Of course, we're not facing a deglobalization, we're facing a reorganization, but with a clear risk of quick deterioration. Let's just remind that trade conducted under MFN rule went from 83% in 22 to already 72% in early 26. So we are all engaged in supporting open trade, but this erosion is picking up very quickly. And it's not only, it's not only because we have two main big actors that are departing from non-discrimination central principle and a key principle in global trade. It's because it has initiated a negative spiral. Like it is an incentive for other countries, for third countries, as well to take initiatives that are increasing protectionism and recreating barriers. And so how can we reverse that spiral? That's the whole challenge that we have. And in addition to that, we see that economic coercion is now a very trivial principle. Only to take only the measures of economic coercion that have been implemented by China between 24 and 25th, they have expanded by plus 200%. If we follow that trend, the risk of rupture is immense. And I think we are all convinced by this risk of deterioration. So how can we address the challenge of now a very clear unilateralism from the first consumer power in the world, and the concentration of production in China, which may lead to 40% of production by 2030. The idea is not to have any coordination focus on anti-US, anti-China. Precisely, the challenge is to build a positive agenda to support open trade and to prevent, first of all, to prevent in the short term further erosion, and to pave the way for to rebuild a stabilized set of rules and to think what should be the future of global trade. So the big challenge is to address the two initial challenges by remaining within the set of WTO rules. How do we proceed to engage this discussion? Because our objective within this track 1.5, of course, it's not a parallel negotiating table. We have the official negotiating table, which is the official track. This one, track 1.5, discussion, dialogue, as we called it, is meant to fuel the official track with ideas, to test ideas, maybe to bring to the table things that were not really in the official track. And one clear initial step is that we have all collectively failed in thinking that we could address the challenges by going alone and trying to negotiate bilaterally. That was a big failure, and everybody lost. And the same way we are accepting some silent economic coercions that will have a huge impact in the short term, like end-user transparency requirement for export of critical components, notably critical minerals. Are we going to accept that, or can we coordinate and think about what we could do? EU and CPTPP weighed as much as 1/3 of global trade, 1/3 of the global economy. The two blocks are quite different animals, and there's an important diversity. It may be a problem, but it may be an asset as well, because within the CPTPP group, we have developed and developing economies. That's very interesting. We have diverse geographies. That's very interesting for our supply chain. So we have a very meaningful group with high standards on which we can build and address all the challenges that we're facing. It's first of all an insurance policy. What should we do in the very short term? And then have a sequencing of work. And that's why we've been working on mapping a sequencing of the work that we should do with the 3 buckets, the short term, mid-term, long term. WTO reform It's rather a long-term perspective, right? It's not like the immediate issue that on which we could deliver. But first of all, even if it's something that we would need to work for the long term, in the short term, we can just work on trying to prevent quick erosion, which means discuss about standstill commitments, waivers. What can we do? How can we use those tracks just to prevent to depart from FTAs, implementation, and respect of WTO rules, respect of FTA's rules, and avoid friendly fire between us, as we also tend to increase our resilience strategy. And what we need to keep in mind is that we're not talking about market access negotiations. This is a long-term issue. Even if we've been discussing the issue about rules of origin, and maybe there might be something interesting to do and with the rules of origin issue. Initially in Paris we thought, okay, that might be rather a long-term issue. Interestingly, in Tokyo, and since then, this is an issue that is getting momentum. And maybe precisely because business is expecting a lot from that side, because there might be an immediate added value for businesses. Maybe I should stop there because we'll have another opportunity to continue. I'll continue just a final sentence on this sequencing. What is very important will be the midterm bucket, because that's the center of gravity of the agenda, of a positive agenda for the EU and CPTPP coordination. That's where we should focus on digital trade, resilience of supply chains, and addressing structural challenges like overcapacity and concentration of production. And maybe I'll go back to that later on. But on those issues, there's a huge march of maneuver on which we can build, and as well sequence the work with the objective to have like short-term deliverables that are also providing credibility to this initiative. We need to have a strong narrative. And it's very interesting to see that since the beginning, during the fall, when the official initiative was launched so discreetly, and now it is something that we are mentioning, that we are discussing with more assertiveness, and because it is a process of regaining assertiveness and how we can what we can do collectively as well to support that open trade.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Fabry. I agree on the regaining assertiveness. I was in Tokyo with Dr. Fabry, and there was something we had 70 of the world's top experts talking about CPTPP, EU alignment, looking at what is the entire landscape, and this idea of the buckets, the short, medium, and long term, not losing sight of any of them, understanding that business needs particularly the short and the medium term, but we have to keep our sights on the horizon as well as we look into the 2030s. So with that, Mr. Chiriac, I will go to you. You are a distinguished fellow, and perhaps you can give some of the Canadian academic and Track 2 perspective on this for us.
Thank you very much, Barrett, and let me join Elvira in thanking the organizers for the opportunity to be here. So I'm an economist, and I'll give you an economist take on where the EU CPTPP should be going. So you've heard from many speakers about the rupture, the flaws of globalization that's gone too far, hyper-globalization, that we're moving from efficient, just-in-time delivery systems to more resilient, just-in-case systems. We're talking about things like variable geometries and so forth, movement from unconditional MFN to conditional friendshoring-based kinds of MFN. Against that background, what are we actually seeing? We're seeing that global trade is proving to be very resilient. it's not falling apart. The tech war, which started with a fairly large gap between the capabilities of the two major protagonists, the the US and China, has narrowed. We used to talk about a 5-year gap. Now we're talking about a few months gap. And that is converging. The global factory, and I'll talk about globalization in terms of as a global factory, that factory remains intact. We have had superficial decoupling at the final assembly stage level, but that's a rerouting of global trade. At the deep supply chain level, that remains intact. The US remains hugely dependent upon the deep China supply chain capability and vice versa. And the small open economies, as Mary Catherine Spears emphasized, are rallying around the system. It's not broken. They like it. They're entering into new agreements which are based on the old templates. We have, the small open economies are moving to write new agreements that eliminate weaponization of trade, right? And this is where the EU CPTPP comes in. So how can we understand this? So let me start off by pointing out that globalization was never about trade. It was about production. And it was enabled by technology. It was enabled by the steep reduction of transportation costs through the containerization system, the intermodal transport system, the wide-bodied intercontinental jet that came into use in 1970, and then by the combination of RFID technology with the personal computer, which enables supply chain management on a distributed basis. The book, The Global Factory, was written in 1985, 10 years before the WTO agreement was put into force. What you saw was that the WTO agreement wrote the operating system for this new global factory, this distributed production system, and that evolved very rapidly, driven by technology. The tariff liberalization under the WTO was consequential to the technological developments. It didn't drive them. The tariffs were a nuisance factor for countries to engage in this system. So what you're seeing then is that this global factory remains intact. And why is it intact? Why is it being so difficult to replicate sort of a separate system in, say, China versus the United States? Well, because it depends largely on the accumulated organizational capabilities of firms. These are highly specialized firms, oftentimes dominating their, the markets in their niche, and most of them we've never heard of. And these firms have got specialized intellectual property which excludes other firms from actually participating in their market. So it's not easy to replicate. And they've got tacit knowledge that is not even published. It's their own know-how. And they've got evolved their sort of co-specialized supplier relationships with their firms. So this is best exemplified by ASML and TSMC, which are the leading firms in the chip production. ASML co-locates its R&D team in Taiwan with TSMC, and there's no team 2 to put in Arizona. You can build a branch plant in Arizona, but you can't replicate that deep supply chain. So this system is very hard to replicate, and the WTO agreement can be understood as having written in the operating system for that particular global factory. And when the Doha round failed, what happened was that then you had this bifurcation or trifurcation of system development through the American-based deep and comprehensive free trade agreements, the European-style deep and comprehensive trade agreements, the Japanese and other East Asian-style agreements. So they continue to develop the OS, but it's like Apple's iOS and Google's Android. They do the same job, but they're not interoperable. They've got different APIs for the suppliers. And what we need to do going forward, because the WTO is no longer really operative in its legislative mandate, is to actually have the EU, which has its own sort of iOS, right, or operating system, cooperate with the CPTPP, which is based on the US system, and start to converge. Now, what we did just a few months ago through the APFC exercise coordinated through the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, many of us were there, Deborah Elms, whom you'll be hearing from later, was on that group. We had a group of international experts. We went through the digital chapter and we found 30 ways in which you could make small incremental improvements to the CPTPP chapter to bring it up to speed. Now, if you applied that same kind of leveling up, moving to best practices as developed in any of the extant trade agreements on an EU CPTPP basis, you would be starting to both drive conversions and developing that OS for everything that works. And for most products and for most countries, that operating system still works. Okay? So the first job of the CPTPP EU cooperation should be to preserve that. The second thing that I would recommend highly is to keep that active in the WTO. If you form a small open economy caucus within the WTO, you retain transparency and legitimacy and the ability to then roll that out forward. We have also, how much time do I have? A couple more minutes?
One more minute.
One more minute. Okay, so there are WTO mechanisms that still can be used. And Mona Paulson, who's a professor at London School of Economics, and I wrote a paper on the situation complaint, which can be used to address these kinds of systemic issues such as the American complaint about structural imbalances or other countries' complaints about China's excess capacities and so forth. You can bring those there. Meanwhile, there are areas that do not, where the OS did not work, and that is for areas which are rich in economic rents, where you have rivalries such as you saw in aircraft, civilian aircraft, in drams during the 80s and 90s, where there are a bunch of those kinds of areas right now. You can't deal with those through the WTO system. You have to deal with those through gentlemen's agreements or something like that, as we did with the OECD. It doesn't work for innovation. Innovation is completely different from industrial production, and we have been applying the OS for industrial systems to innovation, and it's flawed and failed, and that's one of the major reasons why the West has fallen behind China, because China wasn't following that template. And what we have to do then is develop something completely brand new for data and for connected devices, AI in particular, for which we don't have any operating system whatsoever. So that's the way I would approach it. Preserve what's there, work within the WTO, and start to form ways to deal with these areas where the existing OS does not work at all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dan. And we will be capturing all of this in a summary report, because that was a very information-full opening statement. I think we'll come back to the AI data governance point as well, which deserves some further unpacking. Now, turning to Raphael, you have heard from a number of Canadian and Vietnamese officials. I believe you are our first EU official here from. Thank you very much for coming down from Hanoi. And we're quite keen to hear EU's take on this, the idea of the strategic alignment, and what are the areas of low-hanging fruit that we could look to harvest first. Thank you.
Thank you, Barrett. Thank you to the organizers. Last night when I was preparing to come, I decided to wear a red handwrist, tribute to Canada, tribute to Vietnam, but also thinking that Spain may won the World Cup, which it did. So I'm very happy about that. I'm the only EU representative speaking today, so I decided to bring my intervention to a more practical level and to tell you what we aim to achieve. So just I will start with a little bit of history. Our partnership is relatively new. It only started in November 2025, and I think we are talking a lot about it, but we want to achieve real things soon. So the ministerial statement launching the dialogue emphasized our shared commitment to open and rule-based trade and the intention to cooperate in several trade issues of common interest. To signal the importance of this, the President of the European Commission met with the Prime Minister of Vietnam and the Prime Minister of Canada in the margins of the G20 just a few days after the meeting in Melbourne that was in November 2025. So why does it matter? our partnership. I mean, the figures, Barrett, you mentioned them at the very beginning. We are a third of trade, a third of GDP, but also more importantly, a significant larger share of trade than China and the US alone. From our side, we all have, the European Union has good market access through FTAs with all members of TPPP, except with Malaysia and Brunei. With Malaysia, we are starting negotiations. One of the many things we share is that we are firm supporters of the rules-based trade, and we continuously work with partners to ensure a predictable and stable economic environment, allowing our businesses to benefit from the opportunities provided by international trade and investment. We have talked, and you mentioned before, the 5 areas of cooperation that are in the ministerial statement of last year. But what do we want to get out of this partnership? We want this relationship to bring benefits to both sides, and we are looking forward to secure a short-term deliverables for the November meeting in Hanoi. To this end, we are discussing with many of you in several strands, and we are aiming to achieve results on these 3 areas that we have mentioned before: digital trade, supply chain resilience, and the global trade environment. Let me elaborate on the 4 concrete deliverables that we would like to see announced in Hanoi in November. The first is the launch of a crisis response network, supply chain disruptions. The idea of cooperating in case of crisis and coordinate our responses to deal with supply chain disruptions was already discussed in Melbourne. In November, we could potentially launch the crisis response network and have a list of contact details ready. The detailed terms of reference of the network would follow later. Second, we would like to have an endorsement of a reference paper on logistics supply chains. As part of the pillar on supply chains resilience, we recommend to work towards common principles or understanding of logistics and supply chain services. For the November meeting, a reference paper can build on existing best practices from EU and TPPP disciplines and other regulatory approaches where broad convergence may exist. The third deliverable we'd like to see is the endorsement of a common position on trade-related environment measures. For the Global Trade Environment Cooperation pillar, we propose that we undertake to jointly develop guidance for the design and implementation of trade-related environment measures. The last deliverable we'd like to see is announcement of a scoping paper on a digital trade agreement. Within the group, and some of the countries were already mentioned, we have agreed in principle on working together towards a joint report of key learnings on digital trade policy and opportunities to promote compatibility and interoperability. This joint report should form the basis for a scoping paper for a future digital trade agreement. Such a scoping paper could be announced at the ministerial meeting in Vietnam. A joint ministerial statement should endorse these deliverables. It could also contain political commitments to share principles of trade policy and economic security. As Director Cha mentioned before, we have to do this for the benefit of our people and our businesses. And I take the advantage of calling on the chairman of the current chair and the Canadian facilitator to make this happen in November. So that would be my very concrete remarks, but I think this is what, from our side, we want to see, and we want to make progress. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a set of, as you said, very discrete, concrete ideas putting forward for November. That is very helpful. Thank you. I just wanted to check the third point that you're talking about. This was on trade in environmental goods. We're talking environment, green, trees, oxygen, not the trade environment, the policy environment. Did I hear you correctly? Okay, because I think if it is the green environment bit, that we have not actually heard much about that in today's discussions yet. I think it's interesting you bring that up. And now, turning to you, Dr. Tien, thank you for joining us. You have the benefit of having heard now also from the EU, which the other earlier speakers did not. Could you give us your perspective on the strategic alignment and where Vietnam can play in this and maybe should be playing in this discussion?
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here to share some observation on this issue. I agree with all of the above other mentioned by other speaker in the long term, in the medium term, because when we think about when we have the WTO system, the rule base of the global trading system, we have the medium term when we can looking forward for other the expansion of the CPTPP as well as other things. But we want to observe for some of the very short term and from the perspective of the Vietnam. So I think that the philosophy of this forum is how we can bring the benefit to the business by the action, very immediate action, immediate benefit to the business. So we're trying to find the coincidence between the potential, between the shared vision and bring it into the action, the political direction of each of the country as well as the potential benefit to the business. So I think that the first area that can be discussed, that can be achievable in the very short term, is already identified in the digital trade. Because when we're looking at the government level, we see that we already have the EU already have the agreement with the Singapore on the digital trade, and we also in the region in the CPTPP we had a chapter on the e-commerce. We have the regional agreement on the DPA, Digital Economic Partnership Agreement. So that shows the direction of all the government relating to that on the digital trade. From the Vietnam, we also set the quite ambitious target for to have around the 30% of the GDP on the digital economy that account for 30% of the GDP of the whole country. So how can we do that? I think that is we provide the benefit to the mid-power country like Vietnam and other countries in the region, because the economy of the country is mostly the small and medium enterprise. So if we can unify the regulation of the e-commerce, we can facilitate the participation of the small and medium enterprise toward the e-commerce, so they can bring the more benefit to their own and to promote the international trade among the country. The second and the other area that we think that we can discuss is about the resilience of the supply chain. It's already mentioned by the opening and the keynote. It's not the tariff reduction, but it's on how we can unify the root origin, how we can provide accumulation on the root origin, as well as trying to remove the exclusion on those things. I think that both of the CPTPP and other countries have some regulation on the accumulation, and also the EU has some regulation on how we can add the accumulator, the domestic value of the partner. So if we think about the linkage between the EU and the CPTPP, I mentioned earlier, altogether, EU and CPTPP countries that account for around 1/3 of the global trade. So if we can accumulate that the root origin, if we promote the linkage between the EU and the CPTPP country, and we can link maybe some of the very specific product like the textile and garment as well, because we can short the input from one country and then we can process in another country. So I think that the digital trade, the resilience of the supply chain by accumulation of the root origin, it will be the achievable for the short term area for the EU and CPTPP linkage.
Great, thank you. I'm hearing there's a lot of agreement on the three buckets, that these need to be advanced, but it seems like there's a lot of different ideas when you get just one level down in terms of what are the things inside of each of those buckets to focus on in the short and the medium term, and probably an open question around what are the right instruments to actually advance these things, right? In order to actually move forward and not be stuck in negotiations for years. Digital keeps coming up. So I thought maybe we'll go back to that. I want to talk about the instruments, how do we get things done, but also substantively on the digital side and data flows, maybe we can jump in on this. So this is the open discussion point, but maybe I'll ask Dan if you could kick this off, talk a little bit about your thinking on data flows. You've written a couple of papers on this, and then maybe the other panelists can jump in with their views as well.
Sure. So we're still stuck in the digital sort of regulation at the sort of international agreements level on electronic transmissions. And this is a non-starter for business. Business doesn't deal with electronic transmissions. Business sells products based on digital products, based upon whether they're, prices them differently, whether they're durable products, which then deliver a stream of services, or whether they're extinguished upon consumption. So if you stream something live, you pay a certain price. If you download it, you pay a different price. The one is like a good, it's downloaded and delivers a stream of services. That's exactly the definition of a good in economic terms. And if it's consumed, extinguished upon consumption, it's like a service. One should be governed by the GATT, one should be governed by the GATTs. And data is completely different. So data trade happens, is style as fashion, is you have these free internet services provided by Facebook. You get cat sharing pictures and friends, stuff like that. And in return, Facebook gets the data. Facebook became a $1 trillion corporation on the value of that data. It's hugely valuable, but in the traded data, it's zero. And those free internet services are zero. Now, you can't regulate or you can't negotiate trade in data unless you, first of all, break it out of electronic transmissions and then give it a value based upon some indicator, and that indicator has to be the market value of the companies that have accumulated it. Now, if you start with that parsing out, now you're in a completely different world from anything that is in any of the digital trade agreements yet. We mentioned this in our PEC paper on where to go forward, but that's really the start of it. And then there's a second factor, okay, which is that the WTO agreement was written in a world of inert products that did not change, that were not interconnected. And now we are in a world where everything's connected, and that generates completely different dynamics and issues for things like national sovereignty. There is a project at MIT, it's called NANDA, N-A-N-D-A, I'm not sure what the acronym is for, but it's how 1 billion digital agents interact with another billion digital actions, can find each other, enter into agreements, trust, and so on and so forth. And that world we are simply not prepared at all to deal with. And that is where, the Americans had their connected car initiative, which was basically wanted to exclude Chinese cars on US streets because they were connected and sending data back to China. Okay? So you have to deal with that issue of connected devices because we never entered into any agreements in our schedules in the WTO and the GATT or GATTs on connected devices. And yet we're trying to apply those old schedules to this new world. So that's where we have to start. We have to redefine what trade is in actual digital products and data.
Right. Is this a useful direction for us to go to get ahead of this, not ahead of it, as you made the point, catch up with the evolution of data and business models?
Well, what Dan just described is it's exactly a very moving landscape, and we are adopting domestic regulations in a sort of fragmented way for the moment. We have more than 465 agreements since the year 2000. Agreements distributed all throughout the world. And it's not only that we have this fragmented landscape, it's that, as you said, the evolution is so quick that we need to adapt the way we are framing rules or coordinating in preserving interoperability, because that's the main goal. That's why I think it's interesting for us to see within the EU CPTPP framework how we can converge, how we can even set a way to work on those issues. We don't have yet the clear idea of where we want to get to, what is the final point. But even framing the method to work on those issues, it's a very initial element. And an important starting point would be to have more transparency on what is happening within the CPTPP and within the EU, and to ensure this transparency on early information monitoring and transparency, to try to work on convergence since the very starting point.
You bring up, again, the 465 agreements. How do you do this? How do we have alignment? CPTPP doesn't have a secretariat right now. It's a collection of disparate economies who've signed up to some high ambition rules. And so, Raphael, maybe I come to you. You've heard from Madame Santra around Vietnam's ambitions on the support unit, right? And I know this is being discussed at the track 1 level. How does the EU see getting things done with the CPTPP, right? It's not the same structure. Dan has pointed out, there's one kind of North American structure, there's a European structure. We have Asian countries bringing their own negotiating culture. What are you hoping to get? Oh, sorry, Dan, you want to jump in on?
There's an EU structure, there's an American structure, and there's a lacking conceptual structure.
All right.
Thank you. To come back to your question, it was about environmental sustainable aspects. Yeah. Yes, of course. I mean, we are really thankful to Canada as facilitator and to Vietnam as chair of the. But I mean, we also see, as the presentation of Director Cha mentioned, that TPP is still in a process of deepening and enlarging. I mean, there are countries that want to become parties to the treaty. You are still trying to deep. And at the same time, you have partners like us who live outside and they're close and they share some objectives. So it's a difficult way to work. You don't have a secretariat. I mean, we have a whole machinery in Brussels doing FTAs and all kind of trade measures. So for us, of course, we would like to go at a higher speed, but we understand. I mean, at the same time, when you look back, we are only partners for like 10 months. So I mean, we are in less than that. So I mean, we are really making progress. But I think from our side, we have high ambitions to make little steps. And I think there is the Canadian senior official mentioned the short-term and long-term objectives. We want to see concrete deliverables. We want to come to Hanoi in November and be able to announce at least one of these things. Of course, we don't want to have treaties, or we don't have to go legally binding agreements. I mean, I think we all understand that we have to work in a more soft way through commitments. Maybe this simple network of contacts is already a very valuable tool, but I think we have to move that in that direction.
Yeah, and in the sort of spectrum of complexity of doing things, we have everything from simple network of contacts through to, formally negotiated multilateral agreements, and somewhere in there we will land. And this is partly what the track 1.5 process is looking at. Dr. Tian, I wanted to speak to you. You've also been looking at the European Union Vietnam FTA and have seen some of the early harvest from that. When you're looking at what can be done and what are the right instruments to get things done, what's the experience, your experience and background tell you what, in terms of the path forward, what should we be focused on?
I think that for the country like Vietnam, when the lesson that we learn from the other FTA that we have is that we are not focusing only on the regulation at the government level, but we need to bring the regulation from the government into the action of the business. Sometimes it's not about the treaty, sometimes it's not about the legal text of the agreement, but it's the awareness and the utilization of the enterprise. For example, you mentioned about the AI and the data. It's very important that when we make the enterprise to see that the data is precious and the input for the production. So we have some coordinated regulation on how we can trade about the data, can be traded, can be stored, can be traded, and it will bring the benefit to the enterprise. And similar for the utilization of the FTA. I think that is very important when we can unify the root origin among different areas, among different products, among different partners. When we have the dialogue with the EU and the CPTPP, we are trying to bring the common instrument that we can apply and for all the partners on not only in terms of the tariff reduction, but in the standard in how we apply the root origin. Do not differentiate much between the partner from one partner to another partner, but we have a common standard. It's very important. And I think that those things can be do when we have a very, we already have and we can build the trust between the partner, between the EU and CPTPP countries, so we can discuss further instrument based on the mutual trust.
The efforts to build mutual trust is an interesting, we've brought together a great grouping today, and I'm looking forward to the next panel, where we'll also have a live update from New Zealand, from Deborah, as to how these FIT-P discussions have been going, another grouping of small open economies, which are interested in exactly these same concepts, but are going at it in a slightly different way. Right? So let me sum up the panel here and put the challenge to panel 2 and 3 as using Mary Catherine Spears' references to Mark Carney's speech. The table has been set here. Now the challenge for panel 2 and 3 is what do you want to specifically pick up from this and advance and try to convince the folks here that we want to get to in November, in late 2027 when Peru is chairing, and beyond that. I think that would be a good outcome. So with this, I will thank each and every one of you for your thoughts, and I'm sure people want to continue on during the coffee break. Thank you for being here and adding so much to the discussion.
Can I just add?
Oh, yes, of course. Last word to you.
I don't resist the temptation just to add something that the track 1.5 is now launched. Sorry, and we're now launching a 2 years program, so it's engaged, but the idea is really to present some deliverables, actionable deliverables in the short term, and so this is something that needs to have the commitments and engagement all different actors, and that's why I was mentioning the business commitment as well, and this is something that we really want to increase in the process, to have a strong participation of the business sector. And so just to say that this is not only a sort of, we don't have time, we don't have a decade to engage on that. We have maybe 2 or 3 years time to react and to coordinate. So it's a very short-term commitment on which we need to deliver. Sorry.
I fully agree with that. And with that, I will turn it back to our lovely MC.
Our second panel explores economic security in practice, supply chains, digital trade, and resilience. Moderating this discussion is Mr. Jack Herbold, President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Vietnam. Joining him are Dr. Deborah Elms, Head of Trade Policy, High Risk Foundation. Mr. Darren Smith, Executive Director, Indo-Pacific Trade Policy Division, Global Affairs Canada. Ms. Kyoko Kashiwabara, Counselor for the Cabinet Secretariat of Japan and Deputy Senior Official for the CPTPP. Mr. Goh Keng Phong, Economic Counselor, Embassy of Singapore in Vietnam. Please welcome a moderator and panelists. Welcome.
Okay, test. Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce to moderate today's second panel. For our chamber, our mission is to support the growth and help to strengthen bilateral commercial activity between Canada and Vietnam, and CPTPP is, of course, a key anchor of that. So it's a really a pleasure for our chamber to have had the chance to work with APFC and the other organizing parties today. So this second panel will focus on the agreed CPTPP EU priority areas through a practical lens, and in particular the two most consequential aspects, digital trade governance and supply chain resilience. CPTPP's, and I might follow Barrett's advice on this to just call it TPP, digital trade chapter and the EU's GDPR-anchored data governance approach represent genuinely different visions of trusted digital economies. Supply chain concentration in critical sectors, from semiconductors to clean energy inputs, express both CPTPP and EU member countries to shared vulnerabilities. So this session will explore whether the TPP and EU economies can develop common frameworks, mutual recognition arrangements, or coordinated investment screening approaches that reduce exposure without raising new barriers. This also presents some key questions. For example, is TPP EU digital trade interoperability achievable, and on what timeline? What are the most specific or significant supply chain concentration risks shared by member countries, and which investment screening coordination across both blocs would best address economic security concerns? So to help answer some of these questions, we've got a very distinguished panel of speakers here. So please join me in welcoming Deborah Elms, Head of Trade Policy with the Heinrich Foundation, Kyoko Kashiwabara, Counselor for Cabinet Secretariat of Japan, Darren Smith, CPTPP Deputy Senior Official with Global Affairs Canada, and Mr. Goh Keng Pang, Economic Counselor for Ministry of Trade and Industry of Singapore. So we're going to just basically run through with some opening remarks, and then we'll open it up to some questions following. So I will now invite Kyoko to start us off. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Zach, for the introduction. So I'm very pleased to kick off this second panel by making some initial comments on first, digital trade, and second, supply chain resilience. So on digital trade, I'd like to briefly draw upon my own experience having negotiated the e-commerce chapter of the Japan EU EPA. As Zach has just mentioned, one of the biggest differences between the CPTPP and the EU lies in their approaches to cross-border data flows. Under the CPTPP, the starting point is that data should be allowed to flow freely across borders. Restrictions, including those adopted to protect privacy, may be justified through carefully defined exceptions for legitimate public policy objectives. Now, the EU starts from a very different premise. It places the protection of fundamental rights, including the protection of personal data, at its center of its regulatory framework. and it allows cross-border data transfers where appropriate safeguards are in place. So when Japan and the EU negotiated the digital trade provisions of our EPA, bridging this gap was one of the most difficult issues that we faced. Without going into the technical details, the final outcome was essentially a very hybrid model. So some provisions were based primarily on the CPTPP approach, with some adjustments reflecting concerns of the EU. But then other provisions were built on the EU approach, whilst incorporating elements that Japan attached importance to. And the actual rules on cross-border data flows also represent a genuine compromise between the two models. So the point I would like to emphasize here is that Japan and the EU were able to reconcile their differences and reach a mutually acceptable outcome. And I'm very conscious that many other CPTPP parties have also concluded digital trade agreements with the EU in one form or another. So if we look across these different agreements, we may begin to see the possibility of gradual convergence between the CPTPP and EU approaches. After all, although they start from different legal perspectives, they do share the same broad objectives. Both opposes digital protectionism. And both recognize the importance of facilitating the flow of data needed for business while ensuring trust through strong protections for privacy, personal data, and security. But I would also caution that we need to keep in mind the CPTPP is currently internally negotiating the e-commerce chapter as part of its upgrade. So we do need to keep in mind where the CPTPP is going before we start to negotiate with external partners. And then let me now turn to supply chain resilience. So supply chain disruptions can arise from many different causes. For example, geopolitical tensions, natural disasters, pandemics, or export restrictions. Now, I'd like to begin by illustrating how disruptions in supply chains, in the supply of critical goods, can affect not just one country, but all of us. So take gallium as an example. Suppose that export restrictions imposed by a major producing country of gallium make it difficult for Japanese manufacturers to obtain gallium. So what happens? Gallium is used in semiconductor materials and electronic components produced in Japan. So those components are then incorporated into incorporated into electronic products and automobiles manufactured in countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, Mexico, and Europe. So the impact of a disruption in gallium supply does not stop with Japanese manufacturers. It quickly spreads through downstream manufacturing networks across the CPTPP and the EU. Let me give another example. Japan uses rare earths magnet to manufacture industrial robots, automotive components, and other manufacturing products. If imports of rare earths magnets into Japan were disrupted, manufacturers in ASEAN countries such as Vietnam, as well as in Mexico, that rely on Japanese intermediate goods to produce industrial machinery or finished vehicles would also be affected. Japan is not only an end user of critical minerals. Japan is also a supplier of high-value intermediate goods. So in today's highly integrated global supply chains, disruptions at one upstream node can rapidly affect downstream industries across many economies. That is why this is not simply Japan's problem. It's a collective challenge. And as partners, the EU and the CPTPP have a strong shared interest in strengthening supply chain resilience together. Now, I just gave 2 examples of critical minerals, but critical minerals are only just one example. Energy and energy-related products have become an increasing concern in light of recent geopolitical developments. The COVID-19 pandemic also reminded us how vulnerable supply chains for essential medical goods can be. So in other words, there are many sectors, many products where the EU and the CPTPP economies share common vulnerabilities. The answer, however, is not self-sufficiency or decoupling. I think as was, the points were made by Kang and other keynote speakers earlier today, but it's really about trust. So in many cases, expanding domestic production of upstream resources such as critical minerals or energy is simply not feasible. And greater protectionism would not make our economies more resilient. Instead, we should be deepening trade and investment among trusted partners, diversify our sources of supply, and reduce excessive dependence on any single supplier or location. Businesses should be making full use of trade agreements such as the CPTPP, whilst governments, for their part, should minimize unnecessary trade restrictions and maintain predictability for our businesses. There are also several practical areas where the EU and CPTPP economies can cooperate more closely. We can improve supply chain transparency, we can enhance information sharing, including early warning mechanisms for potential disruptions. We can promote public-private partnerships and joint initiatives to develop alternative sources of supply. And as a complement to these efforts, we can also look at cooperation on strategic stockpiles, and recycling may also be worth exploring. So by working together in all these practical ways, we can strengthen supply chain resilience while preserving the benefits of open and rules-based trade. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyoko. Lots of lessons learned and practical insights. So I'll have a question for you on that later, but for now I'll turn it to Deborah.
Sure, thanks very much. I'm glad you talked digital, so then I won't have to. Instead, let me talk about how I think the EU and CPTPP countries can collaborate on supply chain resilience and resilience in general in ways that are very practical and should be simple, relatively simple, to pull off. So the first problem is that if we have trade in times of crisis, the problem with a crisis is that it moves very fast, of course. And this is not the time when you want to be trying to figure out, well, who do I call in a time of crisis, right? So I echo the argument that one thing that the EU and CPTPP countries could do quite quickly, or should be able to do quickly, is at least come together with a commitment for clear focal points so that in times of crisis, whatever they are, that we know who to call. That's especially crucial for CPTPP, which, despite my best efforts, remains without a secretariat, but I still, 16 years on, I am optimistic that eventually we will have a secretariat in the CPTPP that would help with the who to call in a crisis. But between now and then, because I'm 16 years into this quest, I think we should at least have a list of who are focal points for times of crisis. But we also need to think a little bit harder about what else matters in a crisis. I think it's important that the EU and the CPTPP countries are able to notify their partners that they believe that they are in a particular crisis, right? So how do we know we have a crisis? Because we've notified that we have one. We've identified what is the nature of that crisis. Now, it could affect all of us. It might affect just some of us, but I think some commitment to notifying one another that we're having a crisis would be useful. Then it would be useful to me to have okay, now we we know who to call, we know what we're telling them, but we also want to say, well, what are we going to do about this crisis? So that we have a clear plan of action. In times of crisis, we notify, we tell them what the crisis is, and we notify on our own efforts to solve this crisis so that everyone is clear and transparent about what are the steps that are being taken to resolve this issue. And then, a crisis surely should not be forever. So we also need a mechanism in place to withdraw the crisis. Crisis is ended. We are now telling you our crisis is over, and we are telling you that we are going to withdraw certain kinds of policies or programs that we might already have had in place. These strike me as very simple, but nonetheless crucial ways to enhance resilience in a time of crisis, to maintain those issues during that period of disruption, and then to remove them, because that's also crucial, when the crisis passes. And so this strikes me as a fairly straightforward way to enhance supply chain resilience by thinking about it ahead of time. What are some institutional mechanisms that these two groups of countries could put in place before we are confronted with a new crisis, whatever that is, if it's a COVID, if it's a war, if it's a whatever. So I think that would be helpful. I think it would also be helpful in the name of supply chain resilience to potentially think about how do we collaborate on information sharing, but also sort of mapping or war gaming, if you will. What are those critical areas of potential vulnerability? How do we create some kind of collaboration around shared experiences, et cetera? I think that's something that the EU and the CPTPP countries could realistically do that would be very helpful. And then let me make one last, less popular suggestion, which is one way to have supply chain resilient. Well, there are many things that you're going to hear about. One of them is, could we map our supply chain vulnerabilities? Please do not do that. We saw that the Asian Development Bank tried to do that in COVID. This is an example I use regularly, but I think it matters. In COVID, the ADB involved this unbelievable project. I mean, really, hats off to the ADB. They went through 5 specific products: face masks, ventilators, syringes, maybe it was 4, face masks, ventilators, syringes, and some sort of PPE products. And they said, let's map the supply chain in those products. And they developed this unbelievable database on Excel, page after page after page, from the raw materials like the face mask, the cotton, and I don't even know what's in a face mask, but whatever it is, cotton and the elastic bits and the little metal thingy that holds the elastic on. Page after page of who has all of those products, who manufactured those products, where were those products shipped and distributed from, where were those products in retail. So at every level in these products, they mapped out the supply chain. And the minute that they hit publish, it was all out of date, right? The minute they hit publish, it's out of date. Why? Because people who made face masks pre-COVID stopped making them. They couldn't get the whatever. People who'd never made face masks suddenly made face masks. And so the entire thing was sort of stupid and pointless in my view. So please, for the love of God, please do not map supply chain vulnerabilities. I think this is, you can talk about them, you can have a session about them, but if you really wanted to map them, I'm just not convinced that that's a good use of resources. Similarly, and again, also unpopular, I understand the business imperatives for saying, could we harmonize on rules of origin, particularly for dealing with supply chain resilience? It would be easier to move stuff around if our rules of origin were the same. Yeah, all true. But I anticipate a decade. I think a decade worth of work to actually try to do this, and you can't harmonize on something you don't have. So before you even get to harmonizing on rules of origin, you would have to have rules of origin, and you would have to have commitments on tariff levels for those rules of origin. And then you would have to agree on those rules of origin. And I just think, even in the long-term bucket of things that we want to do, this is not a particularly good use of resources at this time. So let's focus instead on problems we can solve. And let's think about whether those problems that are useful, nice to have, I understand the business imperative, but doesn't look like it's going to work now, gets put into a, eventually we'll get to that kind of an issue. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Deborah. We'll go over to Darren.
Okay, thank you very much, and pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. So in terms of maybe just a way to preface, I guess, my remarks on the issues of digital and supply chain resiliency and investment, I think it's useful, especially for the business community members who are here this afternoon, to take a step back in a little bit, to give you a bit of a sense of some of the other underlying motivations that are associated with our work. And I think that one thing that we haven't really mentioned too much yet, but has certainly been a key facet of our work, is trying to find ways where we can ensure that our traders and investors have an enhanced ability to participate in the international trading system, and secondly, that the agreements that we have in place, these tools, are utilized to their maximum potential. And so for us, when we look at the CPTPP EU, it actually speaks to, and the issues that we have before us in this panel today, it speaks to both the comprehensiveness and the progressive nature of our work. Comprehensive because we are taking a look at the issues that impact traders and investors, not just the ones that are attached to our agreement itself, but the ones that are impacting currently and have a potential impact our traders and investors even more so in the future. And the progressive nature of our work in the sense that we are trying to move outside of, let's just say, comfortable architectures or other types of modalities that are associated with our work. The CPTPP EU is, Exhibit A in terms of our work as a collective to try to find new pathways to increase the competitiveness and the ability for our traders and investors to succeed in the global trading context. Now, when it comes to digital itself, I think that there's obviously a lot of enthusiasm and well placed to try to find ways where we can use the CPTPP EU dialogue as a means to try to find ways to enhance our activities in this space. Now, interoperability, is it achievable? Certainly there's ways, I think, in which we can find synergies between the CPTPP and the EU. It doesn't necessarily require us to try to seek out identical rules or full regulatory convergence, but there are certainly pathways that we have that we can examine that can lead to increased transparency, can lead to ideation that helps to facilitate trade in the space, and other things that can be done to help deal with the potential trade costs that businesses may face in this area. And it's also important too that for those who are from the business community here is to understand that as we look at trying to put ideas of relevance on the table, your understanding of how we're going to execute on those ideas is important. It's also important for us to find the ways in which we can make sure that feedback from yourselves, feedback from those who are actually responsible for undertaking economic activity in the space, to keep us apprised of how, whether it's technological developments or other issues that are associated with the evolution of work in this space, needs to be translated into rulemaking and other activities that we're responsible for, that we're keeping pace with those developments. And without that, obviously our ability to make sure that you have the relevant tools in place will be compromised. So we have obviously a lot of different sub-tools, I guess, that can be also put into place. And again, these are issues that I think are going to come up as we look at some of the more medium and longer term opportunities that are in the digital realm, whether that be through a mutual recognition space or other types of interoperability mechanisms. And as I said, but hearing back from yourselves in terms of what is indeed relevant, what are the priorities, and that's another thing I should probably mention as well. The great thing about having a lot of ideas put on the table is that it gives us a lot of potential to make sure that we have a holistic approach in our work, but we're also faced with the reality of capacity constraints, both whether time or resource oriented, and so we have to make sure that we prioritize those things too. So how we develop our list of priorities is going to be incumbent on a number of different factors, but one of which, of course, is what's important for traders and investors to succeed in this space. And I think that, this is perhaps a way to dovetail then to supply chains. Again, this is another area whereby, and I think I would say similar to digital, we're trying to deal with a balance of different types of imperatives that are at play. There's obviously, I think, a renewed focus on supply chain resiliency, and we've talked a little bit about, some of the different issues that we have to tackle in this regard. And there's different ways to do that as well. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution or one specific area that we need to focus on. That said, I think we all share, a similar perspective in the sense that we need to tackle those issues where there are risks, especially on those issues that can have an impact on a wide spectrum of different industrial activity. We've talked a little bit about critical minerals, semiconductors, and metals. But there are other issues, choke points in our system. Obviously, we've come across a recent one with respect to the conflict in the Middle East and what that's done to a number of different product areas, but also more generally speaking, the challenges when it comes to some of the maritime transport interests that we all have. So these are kinds of issues that I think that we continue to tackle, and the dialogue does present that opportunity to provide that space for that kind of discussion to occur. And lastly, I just want to talk a little bit about investment. As an interesting discussion or point that came up in the preparations for this event was whether investment screening is something that we should be talking about. And it certainly does come up. Within the Canadian context, of course, it arises with respect to some of our major trading partners. And I suspect that in other jurisdictions, the same situation applies. But what I would say there too is that this is also an example, though, where there's going to be national or individual perspectives or approaches that each of us will take. And that has to be, I think, acknowledged, but at the same time, is there a balance to that in the sense that how do we ensure that as our national systems deal with or respond to some of those challenges that are there, where we each have different imperatives at play and different understandings of how these nexus points with respect to trade and security and other industrial policy priorities, how do we figure out the balance points in that individually, but at the same time, how do we ensure that we communicate those interests and those approaches to the investment community in this case, so that they have the capability of understanding how they can comply with those demands, how they can and how we as a governments can interject further legal certainty predictability to ensure that while we try to address imperatives on one side, it doesn't negatively impact the ability for our investment interests to also proceed. So this would be, say, another area I think that, when we look at the importance of transparency, the importance of governments making sure that as changes occur, that those expectations are clearly defined and clearly articulated to the investment community, while at the same time, the investment community keeps pace with those developments to ensure that they can comply. For investors in particular, that's a challenge, we get that, but at the same time, it's an area that, while it's challenging, the cost of non-compliance can be much worse and lead to a lot of downstream problems. So while there is a burden, I think, in terms of that's placed on the investment community in this regard, it's also, of course, something that has to require your attention as well. Because if not, well, let's just say your competitors are probably paying attention to that space, and that can lead to obviously an advantage for them. So I'll leave it at that, and next presenter.
That's great. Thanks, Darren. And we'll come back with a few questions to dive in a little deeper later, but I'll turn it over to our final speaker, Feng.
Hi, good afternoon. I think they have covered a lot of ground, so I'll just keep my response as short as I can. I think three main questions have been posed to us. I think the first one on digital, the second one on supply chain and trade, and the last one on investments and screening and how that leads to economic security. So let's start with the first one. I think for digital trade, in the short to medium term, you focus on what is practical and what is doable, and where you can the areas that you already see some convergence. So some of the near-term goal could be interoperable systems that digitize trade documentation and processes such as e-payments, e-invoicing, e-certificates of origin, e-bills of lading, and that will help our SMBs participate in digital trade. Mutual recognition, which I think we spoke about, Darren spoke about earlier as well, will also deliver tangible results for our businesses in terms of cost and time savings. In the medium term, a bit longer, you can also work on starter keys to help SMEs navigate divergence in e-commerce regulations across jurisdiction, guidelines on custom documentations, and compliance measures. And of course, the longer term goal, which we talked about as well, is a digital trade agreement. I think some of us, like Singapore and Japan, which Kyoko shared about, CPTPP members already have some digital agreements with EU, and I'm sure we have some learning points that can contribute to this as well. But at the start, I think useful for us to just come together and speak about the differences in our regulatory approach and find ways that we can achieve convergence. So this will, of course, help to build towards a digital trade agreement in the longer term as a longer term goal. I think the second one on a supply chain risk, there's two parts to it. So number one is during peacetime, right? How do you build trade and create diversification during peacetime so that's more dialogue, communication channels, and things like that. And I think the second one, which is during crisis time, which what Deborah talked about quite a lot. During crisis time, there's no time to do all this. So it's really about having a communication channels, points of contact that you can approach to discuss things. And a lot of times, import ban, export bans are implemented suddenly, and they are quite draconian. And actually, a lot of times, if you can sit down and talk about it, there are actually ways to resolve this without resorting to such draconian measures. So that would be very useful for crisis time. So the last one on investment screening, 3 suggestions here. Number one, you align on principles, not rigid process or sectors. I think Darren mentioned something about that earlier on. Every country, we have our own unique circumstance and vulnerabilities that we want to protect, whether you're a tech hub, a supply chain, gateway, resource, rich economy or whatever. And if you have a one-size-fits-all approach to all this, it will be very difficult and quite unsuitable for many countries around. So I think maybe what we could do instead is to coordinate on our shared regulatory principles, such as non-discrimination, transparency and predictability, regulatory proportionality, as well as accountability. The second one is we must be clear that investment management must be focused on foundational purpose and not prevent a mission creep. So the point here is we want to manage ownership and control risk and avoid creeping into what the company is doing on a day-to-day operational basis. And I think as we go and talk about investment management, that's something that we need to keep at the back of our heads and make sure that we do not unnecessarily interfere with a company's decision. The third one, perhaps, what is most important is that investment screening or investment management is very defensive in nature. And if I want to talk about economic security, you actually have to go a lot deeper into that. Besides such defensive mechanisms, we can talk also more about positive mechanisms. How do you create environment that allows the businesses, the correct kind of businesses that you want to thrive in your economy as well. And some of what we have spoken about earlier, supply chain resilience and things like that, would obviously contribute to that.
All right, well, thanks, Feng. And I mean, we've got a few questions coming up, but there's been a lot said here. So I thought maybe I'd just open it up in case anyone has any comment on any of the topics that were covered. Anything you'd like to add at all? None? Okay, then I'm gonna jump in. Kyoko, I'm gonna start with you. So you had mentioned you were involved with the Japan-EU EPA negotiations. Are there any lessons from the digital trade side that you would apply to supply chain resilience, and or any other sort of key pieces of advice you would share for future similar negotiations?
Yes, thank you, Zach. I think the overarching keyword here, and maybe for this afternoon in general, is trust. So I think the common lesson is that openness needs to be supported or complemented by trust. And in digital trade, trust is not necessarily about governments trusting one another, but it's more about how can you transmit data within a trusted environment, one that protects privacy or personal data or ensures security. So once that trust framework is in place, data can and should be allowed to flow more freely, and businesses can cooperate with greater confidence. And that is actually precisely the concept that was captured by the concept of data free flow with trust, DFFT, as Japan's late Prime Minister Abe proposed back in 2019 or something. So this idea is not just to facilitate the free flow of data, but to ensure that data can flow freely because there is trust. And I think a similar lesson for supply chain resilience here is that it's also about trust, but the nature of trust is slightly different here. So here we're talking more about trust amongst governments, amongst businesses, amongst suppliers across the supply chains. So I think that companies are willing to invest or diversify their sourcing and build long-term relationships when policies are transparent and trade rules are predictable and your trading partners are reliable and trustworthy. So I think that in both areas, digital and supply chain resilience, the objective is not to reduce openness. It is to make openness more sustainable by underpinning it with trust. And in digital trade, that means trusted data flows. In supply chains, it means trusted partnerships. So different forms of trust, but the same principle. And I think that openness really works best when it is accompanied by trust.
That's great. Thank you. Deborah, for you. So I think it was mentioned earlier that trade agreements oftentimes are designed for companies that need them the least, like meaning the ones that are the most experienced or have the most resources. If CPTPP EU digital interoperability happens, what do you think has to be in it for it to be useful or to have an actual tangible impact on, you know, SME-sized companies either here or in Canada or around the region?
Well, that's a great question and hard to answer quickly, but I would say a couple of things. You know, the smaller businesses always struggle the most, clearly, and the smaller businesses need to have information given to them in ways that make sense to small businesses. So what you can't do is let government tell small businesses what this means, because it tends to be a disaster, frankly. It uses too much, the final output is too full of jargon and too much language that doesn't make any sense to small businesses. So you need to translate everything into something that makes sense to a smaller business, and you need to simplify. And I think the challenge here is that from trade officials, they love to say things like paperless trade, digital signatures, e-invoicing, they love this. But the reality on the ground is that none of that works until you've dealt with the first order problem domestically, which is, do we even have a legal framework in place domestically that allows us to have electronic documents with the same legal equivalence as paper, Are we allowed, as an example, as governments, to give that information to our own counterparts in our own government? Because we often have legal problems where governments will say, I have this information, but I can't give it to you because we don't have a legal authority that lets me go from Ministry A to Ministry B. So there are some real fundamental problems we have before we get to the sexy stuff like e-invoicing that need to be addressed. And I don't know whether EU CPTPP is the place to do that. Exactly, it would be lovely, of course, but it's sometimes difficult and complicated. But I do think that you need to think about those sort of first principles, and particularly for trade facilitation, that is crucial for small businesses. It tends to be unsexy, which means that governments tend to make promises and then they quickly drop it and move on to the next exciting thing. They'd rather talk AI than like paperless trade. But actually, that's what matters to small businesses. They trade goods, and crucially, they trade services. We've had almost no conversations about trade and services, but I would say on a CPTPP EU basis, what would help small businesses is anything you can do, first of all, to facilitate small packages. Thank you, EU, for your €3 per package disaster for small businesses, but also, we don't have enough done yet on services. So how do we get small businesses to be able to deliver digital services across these two jurisdictions? That's crucial. It's really underdeveloped and needs to have a lot more work.
That sounds good. Simplicity is key, I think, whenever possible. Darren, one for you. So I think your background, a lot of experience working on the trade barrier side, regulatory side. What do you think is the first place to start in all of this discussion? Like, what would be deliverable number one? Is it recognition of conformity or some sort of, like, as Deborah was mentioning, recognition of standard electronic recognition process, or where would you begin?
Well, what I would say is that it's not my decision to take. So this is something, though, I think that, again, speaks to the real interesting possibilities of the dialogue, in that we have a lot of really good ideas to chase and to see if they indeed can be implemented. It's clear that when you're looking at the regulatory side, it's kind of that proverbial picture of that iceberg. And that when we look at what impacts traders and investors, there's a lot that we understand what's above the surface of the water, but especially in the regulatory space, it's that what's underneath the waterline, where it can have a real impact with respect to the success or failure of our traders and investors in terms of how they deal with compliance costs, and as well as things that might impact market access. When you look at a trade agreement, and there's a lot of hard-fought effort or time that's spent in terms of issues related to border-related measures, but it's what happens behind the border. It can really have, as I said, an impact on success or failure. And it's an area that I think is indeed deserving of strong attention. It's an area that, of course, speaks to, though, that challenge that we have to achieve balance. The balance between the issues that help to ensure that trade does work, but how it also interacts with a myriad of other, policy imperatives. And it's a challenge, especially when you're looking at a group as diverse as the CPTPP, and when you're bringing in the EU into this context. We do have, in many respects, different approaches. But if at least we start with the principle that we're going to respect those differences and try to work with those differences to figure out then where can we see those synergies arise, then I think that's where then you have the prospect for success and for beneficial change to occur. Now, it may not obviously be more only near term. It's something that might fall into more of those medium or longer term baskets. But as long as it's there as part of that, then hopefully we're going to achieve those kinds of specific solutions that will ensure that we do indeed find ways to inject further legal certainty and predictability into the system. And at the same time, we are trying to find ways to, again, lower the trade costs that are associated with the activities of our industries. Now, we have some good things to build upon, and there's some really good ideas that have already been put forth. I'll go back to Dr. Fabry from this morning, or from the panel one, where one of the participants in that process has been the Swedish Board of Trade. They've put together a number of really solid papers that, if you have the time, I would encourage you to read, including one, in fact, that does deal with the question of doing, looking at different ideas on the mutual recognition front. And I think that we have obviously some building blocks to work off of as well. Many of the CPTPP parties do have mutual recognition agreements with the EU on a variety of different spaces. Maybe the dialogue is another avenue in which we can continue to explore possibilities in this realm, and others who are part of the CPTPP family who haven't had that experience directly with the EU can learn from our direct experience in this area. So definitely, I think, to maybe sum things up, very much, I think, an area of high potential and one that does indeed deserve further attention.
All right, well, thanks, Darren. I know I'm getting the time card signal, so I've got just one more for Fang. So on the note of interoperability and sort of real life examples of how things that may look good on paper but don't work so well in practice. You've got a lot of background working on RCEP and integration within ASEAN. So can you share maybe your thoughts for CPTPP and EU when looking to move down this path? What maybe would be an encouragement or a bit of a caution based on your experience?
I think I think you are right to that. When I spent a lot of my career working on ASEAN and regional economic integration, I think one thing which we could learn from ASEAN is integration. We take a very flexible approach, so we agree on a common goal. And if you look at the ASEAN agreements, a lot of times the provisions, different countries in ASEAN, different ASEAN member states, what we call them, actually have different timeline to reach that goal. So for some countries which are more ready, say Singapore or whatever, you do it on entry to force. And for the others that are not so ready yet, you maybe take 5 years or for some that might even take 10 years, and with the promise of other member states helping them. And that's what we have initiative for ASEAN integration as well. So I think if as the grouping gets larger, there'll be a lot of all these divergence occurring. So there might be some need for us to stage out our commitments and allow for some flexibility in that. Of course, if everybody can reach it in one step, that'll be the best. But if not, then maybe allow for some flexibility in that. That's what we worked in the ASEAN context as well. I wanted to say something, but I forgot my point. Yeah, I wanted to talk about I think Deborah mentioned about the helping the SMEs as well. So I think a lot of times we put a lot of emphasis on and maybe we're a bit too hard on ourselves as trade negotiators to create an agreement that is legible to the businesses. But I think a lot of that also has to boil down to the national governments ourselves. After the agreement is signed, how do we translate that into things that our businesses can understand? The trade agreements might not be understandable, but I think it's our duty as the government to actually translate that into something that is understandable. I think in our system, we have been moving towards more infographics, simpler languages, and things like that. I'm not sure how well it works for the SMEs in Singapore, but I did hope that there's still a long ways to go, but I did hope that it has gone somewhere into helping them understand the trade agreements better as well.
Well, that's great. I'm sure this discussion could go on for hours, and maybe it will afterwards in the foyer. But that's all the time we have now. So thank you all. Great job. Great discussion. And please, give our panelists a round of applause. Thanks.
Dear distinguished guests, our final panel this afternoon is activating the CPTPP opportunity from principle to partnership. Moderating this session is Mr. Lawrence Newman, Executive Director of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. Joining him are Mr. Trevor Kennedy, Vice President, Business Council of Canada, Mr. Huy Do, Co-Leader, Fasken Martineau, LLP, Ms. Phung Thị Lan Phương, Senior International Trade Policy Expert, Mr. Jean-Jacques Boufflet, Vice Chairman, European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. Please welcome our moderator and distinguished panelists.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third and final panel discussion of the afternoon. I'm Lawrence, I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam. Some of you might have noticed I'm not Canadian, for which I can only apologize. I am just masquerading for the purposes of this job. Our next topic will be activating the CPTPP opportunity, from principles to partnership. Now, nearly a decade since its conclusion, the CPTPP remains under-leveraged. Tariff reductions have taken hold, but the deeper integration the agreement was designed to unlock, in investment, in services, in regulatory alignment, and in supply chain restructuring, has lagged behind expectations across much of the membership. This session is designed to ask why, and what it will take to change that. Drawing on experiences from across the CPTPP bloc, this panel brings together business leaders, legal practitioners, and government representatives to examine where the agreement is delivering, where it's falling short, and what practical steps members can take to move on from formal commitments to realized economic partnership. The Canada-Vietnam bilateral relationship serves as one illustrative case. Goods trade has grown meaningfully since entry into force, yet investment and service ties remain below potential. And this pattern is echoed in many other member-to-member relationships. And this presents some key questions. First, which provisions of the TPP remain most underutilized, and what's driving the gap between formal commitments and economic reality? Second, what regulatory, procedural, or structural barriers are most constraining cross-border investment and services trade within the bloc? And third, how can TPP members use the agreement proactively rather than defensively to support diversification and reduce exposure to external shocks? I'm delighted that we have with us this afternoon a panel of distinguished speakers to help us answer these and some other questions. I'm delighted to welcome Huy from Faskin, Vung, international trade policy expert, Trevor from Business Council Canada, and Jean-Jacques Boufflet from the European Chamber of Commerce. And I've also been asked to remind you that the full biographies of all our speakers this afternoon are in these packs if you want to know more about them. So please join me in welcoming our panel. So as with previous panels, we're going to have some opening remarks from each speaker, after which we'll have a bit of a discussion and then some deep dive questions. So I'd like to hand over first to Trevor to share his opening remarks.
Well, great, thank you. And just like you opened with an apology, I will as well. I know that there's many participants here in the room from different economies across Asia, or members of the CPTPP. You know, from a Canadian standpoint, if I were to talk about Canada, Japan, or Canada, Australia, I think we'd go in very different directions. So for the purposes of my remarks, I'm going to stay focused on Canada, Vietnam, and I hope it's useful for everyone. Otherwise, a great opportunity to take maybe a power nap this afternoon. But you know, just really quickly from a Canadian business standpoint, I'd say that it's fair to say that the CPTPP, or sorry, Barrett, I don't know where you are, but TPP has been a success for Canadian business, right? If you look at the Canada-Vietnam relationship, you know, we've seen this market emerge into, I think, really one of the most important relationships for Canada in the broader Asia-Pacific region. And I think if you're looking purely at exports, or rather imports into Canada, one of our largest trade partners. But it's been a one-sided relationship for the most part. I had to check the trade figures before coming up here just to see if my expectations were still somewhat linked to reality. $15 billion of exports in Canadian dollars from Vietnam to Canada every year, and only $1 billion of exports from Canada to Vietnam. Something in those figures, a ballpark, I don't know, Ambassador, if I have those right, but anyway, in any case, it's just to demonstrate that, that while, you know, we've seen a tremendous growth, it's not to say it's a problem, right? Trade balances aren't always the best measure of whether a trade relationship's healthy. I went for a run this morning with Japanese branded shoes that were made in Vietnam. I'm sure everybody else has used products throughout their daily life that are made here, and that's a testament to Vietnam's success. But I think as a country, we should strive to certainly do more and provide more as an exporter and possibly as an investor. But before I talk about opportunities and talk about the challenges, I do have to give credit to some success stories, right? Canada has a few in this market. Our insurance sector here, Sun Life and Manulife, are two really successful companies. And it's no longer in the picture before, but you saw a tall tower, one of the icons for this city, Landmark 81. The architectural work was conducted by a Canadian company, Atkins Realis, which I think is just an iconic symbol of Canada and Vietnam. So, really I look at what's the opportunity for Canada in this region. I think it's the energy sector, right? This is where Canada has a potential to really close the gap. Folks here may not appreciate the significance of our natural resources and the importance of our West Coast to get energy here, oil, gas, LPGs to this market, all things that Vietnam needs. We're a major potash producer, which is extremely important, I think, for the sector here to produce your agricultural economy. So, it's not clear what Vietnam will do for its nuclear sector, but Canada is a leading. We have two leading companies in the nuclear sector. Our CANDU technology being one of the most advanced in the world. Hopefully, as Vietnam adopts nuclear energy, it uses Canadian technology, and in any case, we could be a major supplier of uranium. But I think there's an opportunity as an investor to really do more here. Canada's home to some of the world's largest pension funds, large institutional investors. A data point I heard last week, it came from a Canadian official. I'm not sure if this is official data or not, but I'll use it anyway. Canada is the 4th largest international investor in the world. I think when you account for all of our institutional investors, our pension funds, other major organizations, but very little activity here. And so how do we find a way to get more Canadian companies to invest in Vietnam and contribute to this country's incredible growth story? So maybe I'll just take a pause on that point, but just to say that I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. The CPTPP certainly helps. If we didn't have a trade agreement today, there would be a request certainly from the business community to have a trade agreement. I think it's transformational for the relationship. But as our late great trade minister, the Honorable Jim Carr once said, trade agreements are a bridge and it's up to the business community to cross that bridge. And I think that's the point we're at today, is how do we get the business community to get more active in this market? And I'll be happy to speak to some of those points later on, but thank you.
Thanks very much, Trevor. I'd now like to hand the floor to Ms. Fung, please.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to be here to share some of my views on the CPTPPs and CPTPP implementation in Vietnam. Just a short introduction about myself. I previously worked for the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry in the WTO and International Trade Centers. So I have nearly 20 years of experience working on FTAs, on WTO commitment, including the CPTPP. So I have been consult a lot of businesses on exploiting the CPTPP and other FTAs of Vietnam. So today I would like to provide some of the perspective from the Vietnamese businesses and give some reasons why such a very big and important FTA has not yet fully exploited by the businesses. First, we should look at the CPTPP member, and we can see that among the CPTPP member, we already have FTAs. For example, Vietnam under the CPTPP, only Canada, Mexico, and Peru, that we did not have a mutual FTA before the CPTPP. So that means that the businesses, they have a multiple FTAs to use. And the CPTPP is just one of the FTA. And for the businesses, the CPTPP may be considered to be quite complicated and also newer for them. So they maybe still use the other FTAs that they're already familiar. And maybe the rules and the requirement and the condition to meet is easier. And second, we talk about services and investment, and we see that the exploitation of the CPTPP and this sector are not fully exploited, and compared to trade in goods, the results are not as significant. However, we should look into details of the commitment, and we can see that the CPTPP and also other FTAs, the commitment on trade in goods, on tariff reduction and other trade in goods commitments are often more significant than the commitment on trade in goods, trade in services, and on investment, and also other sectors. So that's why we can see the result of the CPTPP and also other FTA implementation in trade in goods are often more significant than other sectors. And the third reason, and this one is for the businesses, from the side of the businesses, considered to be one of the most important and challenge. That is although the FTAs, the CPTPP already create a framework with a lot of significant commitment on opening the market for the businesses, there are still a lot of non-tariff measures. For example, under the CPTPP, we have a significant commitment on reducing and eliminating tariffs, and we also have some rules to reduce the non-tariff barrier. However, in practice, when they export a product to other countries, they still have to meet a lot of regulations. These are called non-tariff measures. Of course, under the WTO, and we also know that non-tariff measures may serve legitimate purpose to protect the environment, to protect the human health, and other legitimate purpose. But if they are misused, they can become the non-tariff barriers, and they can reduce the incentive created by the CPTPP. And there is statistic data showing that when the tariffs are reduced by FTAs and by CPTPP, there is an increase in non-tariff measures in some sectors, and in some countries there is trend of non-tariff measure increase. And the final reason, I think, is because we now have a lot of FTAs. For example, Vietnam, we now have 17 FTAs in effect, and we are negotiating a number of other FTAs. So we have a notable of FTAs. But the understanding of the business is still limited. May I ask you here, we have many companies here, the level, the understanding, how many of you understand thoroughly the CPTPP commitment, which includes 30 chapters and thousands of pages? Very difficult, right? And we have 17 FTAs, 17 sets of rules. And today we talk a lot about conversion, synergy of the rules. But before we reach any progress on conversion, the businesses, they are facing different sets of rules under different FTAs. So very difficult for them, especially for the SME. We at BCCI and also the MOI, they have FTA index annual survey, and the results show that the level of understanding of businesses on complicated FTA commitment still very low. As I remember, the percentage of the businesses, they have a good understanding of the FTA's commitment below 20%. Meaning the remaining, they just heard about the FTA and have a very, general understanding of the FTA. So for SMEs, it's really a challenge. So I also want to take this opportunity to have some recommendation to help the businesses to better exploit the CPTPP and also other FTAs in the future. First, I think that before we move on any new commitment, any new rules, that today we are talking about whether we can have some kinds of new rules, new commitment for CPTPP and others to improve the agreement. But I think before we move on to any new ones, we need to review the implementation of the old ones. Actually, whether we already have a comprehensive report on how the CPTPP implemented and exploited in CPTPP members. We need to have such kinds of practical input before we negotiating anyone. So we need to review the existing one, and we update and revise the rules that is not very beneficial or still create a challenge for the businesses to exploit the CPTPP. Second, I once again focus on the non-tariff measure. We need to continue focus on reducing non-tariff barriers. We talk about digitalization, and I think that under the ASEAN, we have a single window. And why we do not have a like CPTPP single window where we can promote the transmission of data. We talk about data sharing and trusted digital framework for the business. So such kinds of commitment can help to reduce non-tariff measures, and other initiatives like harmonization of standards, conversion of rules among the FTA, all of these can help reduce the non-tariff barrier for the businesses so they can better exploit the FTAs. And finally, helping the businesses, especially the SME, to understand and know how to exploit the FTA are very important. So I want to take the opportunity to just introduce to you that Vietnam now has a very good initiative. We are building an FTA ecosystem. Actually, this one is the initiative of the MOIT, but I would like to ask for permission from Mr. Khanh to say that Vietnam already have the FTA ecosystem, and this is expected to be a system that connects on the business support organization to support the business in exploiting the FTA. So we connect on the stakeholder in the FTA implementation ecosystem together, and I think that such kind of initiative in the future will help to the businesses to apply better CPTPP and other FTAs.
Thank you so much. I'll now hand over to Huy for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you, everyone. And I am really actually delighted to be here. This is a bit of a homecoming for me. It's my journey with Vietnam and trade began probably 25 years ago, maybe more. As a very young lawyer, newly called lawyer, I was asked by a partner of the firm I worked with to help him on this retainer he had. It was with the Canadian International Development Agency, as it was called back then. It was a technical assistance matter where they were assisting the Vietnamese government to join the WTO, in its application to join WTO. So that was my first foray. And it's amazing to me, in the span of 25 years, how Vietnam has gone from essentially a non-market economy to well integrated into the international trading order. Not only are they a member of the WTO, member of APEC, ASEAN, now the TPP. So it's been a tremendous boon, and from my perspective as a private practitioner, my day job involves advising clients on investing in Asia, into Asia, or helping clients from Asia invest in Canada. That's by and large what we do. Baskin is Canada's probably largest law firm, and so we have offices across Canada. We do a lot of this work in terms of directing clients in terms of investments overseas and vice versa. And from my perspective, I was very heartened to hear all of our policy makers this morning talk about a commitment to the rule of law and a rules-based order. Secondly, transparency, and thirdly, predictability. As a lawyer, that's what we that's what we live on. And also, the fact that you have all these agreements that need lawyers, that's also not a bad thing necessarily. But as Foong said though, clients don't really care about the 200 pages of agreements. They want to understand how easy it is or how difficult it is to invest, right? So from my perspective, you know, and this was raised on the last panel in terms of FDI screening, because I deal with that a lot. And FDI screening has been, you're seeing a lot more of it these days. It's not just Canada. Canada has, I think, reservations in all of our trade agreements to deal with our FDI screening. We have an Investment Canada Act that has an economic screen. It also has a national security screen. And I think the one thing that worries me is that in this day and age, there's lots of talk, and if you look at what's happened with the US and Canada, our relationship with the US, all these tariffs that are being imposed on Canada are apparently contrary to all these obligations under trade agreements, but they're being invoked under national security rules, according to the US. Right? So I think now in this context, we're hearing a lot more about things like economic security, digital sovereignty. Those types of issues are going to need to be ironed out. Right? So how do you deal with it in the agreement? And I think Darren had mentioned, you know, you have a carve-out for FDI. I'm not sure that's a good idea in terms of an FDI screen based on economics. A national security screen, I understand, and I think that's one that I think is already in existence in most trade agreements. There are national security screens. From an investor's perspective, and this goes both ways, like, we have a very, very stringent national security process in Canada as well. What businesses want is clarity and predictability. They understand that national security is an issue for most countries. They want you to kind of identify what it is that is going to fall within that bucket that they cannot invest in. Right? But we don't, it's very difficult because governments want flexibility when it comes to national security. When I started practicing, national security, at least in my mind, meant a very narrow area. It's protect the realm, you know, sovereignty issues. Over the years, it's morphed. You talk about economic security. What does that mean, really? Right? Digital sovereignty, all these other issues. They're legitimate, but I think you have to kind of define it in a way that investors understand and businesses understand. I think that's kind of the key from my perspective in terms of trying to promote investment. The economic screen in Canada we have on the net benefit side, because there's a screen that says if the deal is of a certain size, it has to be of net benefit to Canada. The thresholds are so high now, it becomes kind of meaningless. And there's very rare instances where those deals are blocked, so I'm not even sure it's necessary. The other areas where you're going to find that you need to kind of think about and develop rules around would be things like national champions. We're talking about that, right? I was at a conference in DC where the head of the FTC in the US, which is an antitrust agency, he was pretty clear in saying that the US wants to dominate AI. That's going to be the national champion. Right? So if that kind of thinking is permeating through all these different jurisdictions, those rules, the trade rules and the foreign investment rules, have to factor that in. And you have to set up rules that are clear enough that businesses feel comfortable that they can comply with.
Thanks very much. And for our last speaker, I'm delighted to invite Jean-Jacques, who's going to share with us some insights from the EU side and EU business side, and some thoughts on the success or otherwise of the EVFTA implementation, and perhaps what we can learn from that.
Thank you. Thank you, Lawrence. Well, for those of you who didn't read my bio, I'm the Vice Chairman of EURICHAM in charge of advocacy. You know, we have 1,400 members. We are a chamber of chamber. So we're covering all the member states, business community. But in my previous life, I was an EU civil servant, and I did negotiate the free trade agreement, I think with Mr. Hang, if he remembers me, 10 years ago when we were still young and beautiful. And I did the greatest mistake free trade agreement negotiator should never do. which is to be involved in the implementation of the treaty you have negotiated. Yeah? When I was in Brussels, I was told, never do that mistake. What you have negotiated is good, but let the other implement it. But for me, I did it, and I stay in Vietnam because of my origin. And now I'm living the bitter side of it, and all the loopholes, yeah, I can say. Why loopholes? It's because these free trade agreements are country to country. Well, in the case of the CPTPP, it's even worse because it's a plurilateral, at least for the EVFTA, it's a bilateral agreement. But they are country to country, and it's very difficult for business, and particularly SME, to grasp where the beef, the benefit of it, and to involve it. Yeah. The second difficulty is that these free trade agreements are desperately outdated. Yeah, they were in the case of the EVFTA. They were negotiated between 2012 and 2015, you remember. And CPTPP was a little bit younger, but nevertheless, we cover mainly goods, we cover less services, and new avenue like digital is scarcely covered, yeah? And that's the main difficulty, because these are where the challenges are. In terms of goods, I think particularly talking about Vietnam, like many of you, I'm more involved in Vietnam now. My experience is gathered in the implementation. We are writing maybe 2 or 3 letters per day, working days, to the Vietnamese government, and half of them are dealing with the implementation of the free trade agreement. So it's a lot to do, to obtain. Why? Because first you have to know that our distinguished colleagues from MIT are very good negotiators, and we negotiate brilliant agreement, but they are not in charge of the implementation. It's other agency, other ministry, Ministry of Finance, particularly the custom, is governing the rule of origin, and if you don't have the right rule of origin, you can forget the free trade agreement. You're not allowed to the benefit of it. So it's key. But you have other issues. You mentioned the technical barrier to trade, which were not sufficiently covered in the free trade agreement and remain key. So in terms of practical benefit for businesses, it's a struggle, I must say. It's a daily struggle, and that's why chambers are so important for you, because only chambers can have some knowledge of the free trade agreement, but they are connected, they can connect you to the right people in the Vietnamese ministries, which remain key for obtaining your rights, but also the private lawyers or whatever, and also your home sponsor, your home protector, which is your embassies, yeah? So that's very key for obtaining these free trade agreements. They remain crucial in these worlds of changing environment, where the multilateral WTO rule have practically disappeared. Well, you can be threatened to face an increase of tariff just because the wind is blowing from the wrong direction, and the smoke goes in the holy country. And therefore, I mean, what is for a world, for someone like me who has lived 50 years in negotiating free trade agreement, on the basis of which we have built the prosperity of the world, first of the developed world, and then the emerging country coming to that. I mean, it can be a blow like that. It's unfortunately the situation we are facing now. So the only thing which seems to resist are these bilateral or plurilateral countries, at least for countries like ours, where we still put a key in preserving these rights and obligations. And that's very keen and very precious. Okay, I will stop now and leave you for the questions.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. You mentioned Eurocham's 1,400 members. That's almost as many members as CanCham. Don't fact check me on that, but we're coming for you, right? Before we move on, does anyone want to pick up on any of the topics raised in that discussion, or should we move on to the questions? Okay, I'll move on to the questions. I think, Trevor, I'll start with. So you speak with Canadian CEOs about Asia every week. When they explain why they haven't expanded into CPTPP markets, what do they actually say? And of those reasons, which are the ones that governments can fix and which are just, for instance, businesses choosing the US market?
Well, I think there's, specifically in this market, I'd say that there's a high level of interest. I mean, there's no question. People know about Vietnam, they're interested. We had a meeting just last year with some CEOs on the margins of ASEAN with the economy minister here with some CEOs. And I was amazed afterward to hear the high level of interest from a wide range of companies in the market. But there does seem to be a mismatch between the interest and then the actual activities. I mean, I think the reality is that with the US market or many other markets, there's a degree of familiarity, right? As a Canadian company operating in the United States, in many cases you can masquerade as an American business, right? There's no distinguishing factor in many cases, and it's close by, it's familiar, it's in the same time zone. You can travel there simply. There's so many factors, I think, why business leaders have gravitated and been successful. It's also the largest market in the world, right? It's a blessing and a curse for Canada to have the G1 beside us, right? So, but I think in terms of expanding to this market, I don't have the silver bullet, but I have a feeling that for this part of the world, aside from those companies that are particularly adventurous and would move in really without much guidance, this might require some hold-handing, right? For the government to work more closer in partnership with our private sector, to be more deliberate about what are the opportunities, what do we want to seize here to succeed in this market. Because I think that just continuing as we are, we're not really reaching our full potential. So, and that could be expanded to other markets in Asia too. You get very different experiences all across this region, right? It's so difficult to paint the Asia Pacific with a broad brush, or even the CPTPP countries. But I think in this market, it's very clear there's an opportunity, there's very clearly an interest, and we should need to find a way to kind of bridge that gap. So hopefully through some of the major summits that'll be taking place in the future, I think it's significant that Vietnam's hosting APEC next year. That'll be a major draw for business leaders, certainly from Canada and many other places. Hopefully we can use these occasions to move the needle for Canada, to really get business leaders to travel here, to experience, to build the relationships that they need to build to be successful, partner with local partners. And so I think it's really going to be a partnership here, but there's no question there's a tremendous amount of opportunity and interest. And I do know from talking to my members that they are looking for opportunities around the world. They do want to expand and diversify, and this is a market that I think stands out both as an ASEAN member, as a CPTPP member, but also as a standalone economy. Vietnam has an incredible growth story. I think it's led the world and certainly this region in growth, at least been in the top 2 or 3 for the better part of a decade, and I think the future looks bright as well. So I think it's certainly in our interest to be here in a bigger way, and hopefully we can help to facilitate some of that connection with the business community.
I think it's a matter of time, really, because the interest is definitely there. I mean, Vietnam is such a vibrant economy. It's growing fast. It's, have a bright, very young population still. It's a huge market. I think part of it is the Canadian way. We tend to do things slowly. And I think we got a kick in the pants with the current U.S. administration in terms of how it's being, that bilateral relationship is dealing with us, how Canadians are starting to, hear the call from our prime ministers and others to diversify. I think it's going to take a bit of time. We have an amazing trade commissioner service in Southeast Asia. I've traveled to this region for the last 10 years, and they are very well informed. They can help. But the problem is trying to get people out of the boardrooms in Canada to say, go. The big pension funds are here in Asia, not necessarily in Vietnam, but a lot of them are here. But those are kind of the exception as opposed to the rule. There are some other companies, I think, that really should be here. Like, I think Lululemon's here, Levelware's here. Like the insurance companies are here, Manulife, Sun Life, those companies are here. But there are lots of other Canadian companies that we do work for. And we tell them, like, why aren't you looking overseas? And a part of it, it's the comfort level, I think, as Trevor said. We're spoiled because we're so close to the biggest market. That market is not so easy anymore, so I think people are forced to look elsewhere. So I think it's a matter of time. I think within the next few years, I think you'll see a lot more activity. I've been saying that though in Canada for a while now. I think our Asia Pacific group, we've been saying that for a decade. It shifts around in terms of where the flows have been, but I think Southeast Asia, I think it's going to be the next few years.
Could I just echo that point that the Trade Commissioner service is excellent, and just I think a lesson we've learned from other markets is it's kind of like a snowball forming. Like I think as you start to see more Canadian companies succeed in a market, more kind of question why aren't we there? So on this investment picture, I'm not sure what our institutional investors will do. For folks not familiar with Canada, we have some very sophisticated pension funds that are very active globally, as well as other institutional investors. I think if you start to see success stories from some of those institutions moving into markets like Vietnam and maybe helping to build some of the infrastructure that this country needs to also become a larger customer for Canada, I think you'll start to see more other companies following suit. And you can point to other markets across Asia where that's taken place in the past 15 years. Maybe you just use India as an example where you've seen really from zero to a significant footprint over the course of maybe 15, 20 years. Not to say that that same success will happen here, it's maybe a unique circumstance, but it just goes to show that once you have a few success stories, it can lead to others looking to follow suit. So, hopefully there'll be some of those in the future that we can point to.
But it is a two-way street, right? Because I think I'm seeing a lot more Vietnamese investments into Canada, which I think in the past was less prevalent. So you're seeing the relationship is bilateral in that sense. I think in the old days, it used to be Vietnamese exports to Canada and FDI, going the other way. Now it's getting more, on the trade stuff it's still not balanced, but on the investment side, I think it's getting more balanced. I'm seeing more Vietnamese investments coming into Canada.
I wondered if, Phung, could you talk to us a bit more about the FTA ecosystem and the idea behind it?
Actually, MOIT, Mr. Khanh should be the better position to provide you information about the FTA ecosystem. But luckily that I have the chance to join the MOIT in building the FTA ecosystem. And before I provide you more information about the FTA ecosystem, I just want to provide you the context of Vietnam, why we have to build the FTA ecosystem for the businesses. So you know that Vietnam joined the WTO in 2007, and since then we negotiated many FTAs. So for the businesses, FTA commitment and WTO commitment are very new, very complicated for us to understand. I still remember the time when Vietnam was negotiating the CPTPP. Mr. Khanh today, he was the negotiator, but the next day he was the teacher, the lecturer of the training courses for business. So at that time, the MOIT was very active, and even the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry on the association. We try to educate, to inform the businesses on FTA commitment, help them understand and then exploit. But we realize that the only efforts of MOITs or some business associations are not enough. Actually, up to 97% of Vietnamese business are SME. So although we try to have many training courses, many conferences, it's still difficult to educate all the SME about such a lot of FTAs and their complicated commitment. So we realized that we need to mobilize other supporting organizations, like even the financial institution, even the logistic providers, even the universities and research institutions. They are the, how to say, they are also very important and they can provide support for the businesses. So we want to mobilize all the stakeholders in the FTA implementation ecosystem into one program that we can connect them with the businesses and mobilize the various resources, not only the information. We need to provide the businesses with not only the information, not only the understanding of FTA commitment, but also support them in other day-to-day business activities, what they need to do, what they need to comply with the foreign market requirement. All of these things we need to mobilize all the stakeholders in the FTA implementation ecosystem. So that's the ideas of MOIT, that we will build that program. So this program will expect to be a coordinated public-private mechanisms that bring on the stakeholders and mobilize all the resources for the businesses in implementing FTAs. And this mechanism, this program is highly supported by the businesses, and the program also approved by the government and expect to implement in the coming time. So this is really a very promising program, expect to provide the businesses with a lot of benefits and support and connect all the stakeholders. So I think that this is a good program that the businesses should follow and become the member of the FTA ecosystem and enjoy the benefits from the ecosystem. And I think this is also a good initiative that the other countries can consider to reference when they providing support activity for the businesses.
Thank you very much. Before we're finished, one last question for Jean-Jacques. European businesses, I follow the Business Confidence Index, cite the same frictions as those from Canada. Does it make sense for chambers like ours to work together and advocate together on those shared implementation barriers rather than FTA by FTA?
Yes, I do think that we have a lot in common. As I say, beyond the letters of this agreement, the key issue is the implementation, and particularly by the technical structure, which sometimes seems to escape the control of the central government. So it's important that we level our lobbying, and the best way is to be together. I mean, if you add US, EU, Japan, Korea, and Canada, you have 80% of the Vietnamese exports, yeah? And that's something they listen to. On top of that, you have the challenge of the new government, the new leadership, and the fact, for those of you who are familiar with the Marxist-Leninist division of power, you have the President of the Republic and the General Secretary of the party who are the same person. So you have a unity between the party and the government, and that's the key for making rapid progress. And you've seen the challenge, what Polam has proposed. It's a very ambitious program, and this ambitious program is focused on trade, international trade. Yeah, of course, attracting investment, but also securing the export. And he's visiting. He will visit Brussels. He will visit France. So he's doing a lot beyond the free trade agreement. Now the government is serious about implementation, and particularly for modernizing the economy and therefore for attracting investment. So it's key that the foreign chamber, who are now recognized partner by the authority of Vietnam, are able to speak with one common voice. Yeah? And for that, there is nothing better than sharing and coordinating. We're already doing it with US, with Japan, Korea. We're still waiting for Canada.
Thank you, Jean-Jacques. I think we're about out of time now, so please join me in thanking our fantastic speakers in the panel.
To conclude today's forum, it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Ngo Chung Khanh, Deputy Director General of the Multilateral Trade Policy Department, Ministry of Industry and Trade of Vietnam, to deliver the closing address and share his reflection on today's discussion and the road ahead for CPTPP, EU cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Ngo Chung Khanh.
Well, distinguished guests, business leaders, ladies and gentlemen, as we come to the conclusion of today's forum, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all our guest speakers, moderators, and participants. We have a rich and wide-ranging discussion covering trade architecture, economic security, supply chain resilience, digital trade, investment, and most importantly, the practical use of the CPTPP by businesses. Today's discussion has shown that the challenges facing the global trading system are serious. However, they have also shown that there remains a strong commitment among governments, businesses, and experts to preserve openness, strengthen cooperation, and find practical solutions. So, where do you go from here? I would suggest 3 practical steps. First, governments should continue the CPTPP-EU dialogue with a clear focus on areas where progress can reduce costs and create opportunities for businesses. And we are honored to work with Canadian colleagues and to discuss with EU and to come up a very ambitious agenda, a very clear and detailed agenda for ministers to adopt by the end of the year. And we hope that we can reach practical outcomes from the agenda. Second, the business community should identify specific regulatory and commercial obstacles rather than only making general calls for closer cooperation. Concrete proposals will make it easier for government to respond. And the day after tomorrow, we also hold a kind of connectivity activities for business to talk, to share ideas with senior officials and where they can connect each other to create business opportunity for them. Third, we should create stronger and more regular connections among businesses, chamber of commerce, research institutions, and government agencies across CPTPP and European economies. Policy dialogue is important, but commercial relationships are ultimately built between people and companies. Today's forum should therefore be seen not as the conclusion of a conversation, but as a beginning of a practical work program. Vietnam, as the chair of CTP in 2026, stands ready to work with Canada, other city members, the European Union, and the business community to take this agenda forward. I hope the conversation begun today will continue during the networking session and more importantly, will lead to concrete cooperation in the months ahead. Once again, thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the conclusion of the Canada-Viet Nam Forum on Economic Resilience and CPTPP EU linkages. On behalf of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, the Ministry of Industry and Trade of Vietnam, the Embassy of Canada to Vietnam, and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, thank you for joining us and contributing to today's meaningful dialogue. We hope today's discussion have great new ideas, strengthen partnership, and open doors to deeper collaboration between Canada, Vietnam, and our partners across the CPTPP and the European Union. We now warmly invite you to continue conversation over networking, cabinets, and refreshment outside the ballroom. Thank you once again for being with us today. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, safe travel, and we look forward to welcome you again to us in the future event. Thank you so much.